Good evening, everyone. So I guess we shall start this tonight. I guess why don't we go ahead and start with the public comment period. So is there anyone that would like to speak?
Good evening, committee. For the record, Fred Volz. Regarding item number 2 on tonight's agenda, SNWA and its member agencies, including the City of Boulder City, have been lulled into a false sense of security that our water supply is sufficient into the future. Clark County uses enormous amounts of water to irrigate ornamental grass, operate public and private golf courses, and fill outdoor swimming pools. Real leadership around water conservation would acknowledge that we can't be 100% sure of snowpack and runoff in any given year or a given series of consecutive years. Rather than doing all we can to stop current water waste through required measures, not just voluntary ones, we see no initiatives by government to stop government water waste at places such as municipal golf courses, parks, and facilities such as the Bureau of Reclamation's Southern District Administrative Offices. The same dynamics apply to private golf courses. We regularly see sprinklers operating on windy days and during the heat of summer days with no concern for water waste at the 2 municipal Boulder City golf courses. These same 2 courses have considerable ornamental grass beyond greens and fairway removed and replaced with xeriscape. It is the same throughout the Las Vegas Valley, yet SNWA is not taking action to require these changes. Continuing to boast about SNWA's past efforts when water demand from new development of homes and businesses proceeds without restrictions is not sound planning for the future. SNWA has not fully replenished the many aquifers it has overdrawn in the Las Vegas Valley for decades. There are still thousands of homes on private water wells that draw down the same aquifers without any limitations on consumption. SNWA cannot count on new water supplies coming from eastern Nevada, as the Great Basin Water Alliance and others have successfully stymied the proposed pipeline build from that area of the state. Focusing primarily on voluntary reduction of residential water consumption only is a recipe for water supply problems in the future. Our water supply depends upon many other variables SNWA cannot control, such as the weather. Several questions surfaced from agenda item 3 on tonight's agenda. Page 65 of today's support materials, titled Fiscal Year 2021 Budget, Utility Fund Summary, lists $500 of fiscal year 2021 depreciation for the Administrative Utility Fund, line 60. Why does this function have depreciation at all? The Electric Fund, line 61, lists depreciation under both revenues and expenditures. Why is depreciation an offset to the revenue subtotal when it should be an expense item only? The Water Fund lists, line 62, lists only depreciation in the expenditures grouping, as does the Wastewater Fund, line 63, and Landfill, line 64. An explanation of how a nonprofit government utility operation even has depreciation expense would be enlightening. And I realize Ms. Pelletier is not here tonight. There is no visible sinking fund, though, for asset replacement into which depreciation expense has been deposited, nor does such an entity receive a corporate tax bill against which depreciation expense would ordinarily be a deduction. These realities beg the question, where does the depreciation expense go after it's been collected from the ratepayers? And finally, I'd like to comment on the updated ongoing CIP progress sheet that's being handed out tonight. Looking at the revised budget of $18,193,000 and change and the total expended in encumbrances, it appears that almost 2/3 of the total $18 million has not been spent through 7 months of this fiscal year. And the question I'd like to pose that hopefully will be discussed in any commentary offered by the Utilities Director is, how are they planning in 5 months' time to spend almost $12 million, well, actually a little over $12 million. Do they have the capacity to actually contract for these projects or get them underway even? Or it begs the question about fiscal year 2021 and how many projects should be approved. It seems like they're biting off more than they can handle. Thank you, and I'd ask my comments be added to the record.
Thank you, Fred. And I do not believe there's anybody else with comments. So we'll shut the comment period down. And I guess to help move the presentations along, if there's no problem, then maybe we should move the presentation, item number 2, to the first, and then put the meeting minutes afterwards. Gives Southern, they won't take a long time, but they'll take a little bit, and I don't think they care about it. So does anybody have any problem with that? Okay, so I'm sorry, even before I start talking, right? Sorry. Okay, so why don't we start with number 2, presentation from Southern Nevada.
Okay, with us again is Colby from SNWA. She was here previously, as you're aware, on the SNWA Water Conservation Plan, and she's here tonight to present the latest water resource plan, or at least highlights from the latest water resource plan for SNWA. So thank you, Colby.
Thank you, Dennis, Chairman. I appreciate you inviting me back today to tell you about our water resource plan. I have some introductory slides here that may be a little repetitive. In comparison to our typical water resource plan presentation, I did not include a lot of the information we usually include on conservation because we went over that pretty extensively the last time I was here. But should you have any questions related to that, I'm happy to answer them.
And as we did last time, it's okay to ask our questions as you go along.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Perfectly fine. Okay. I always forget where I have to point it. Oh, it's off.
You have to turn it on though. Left side, upper side.
Got it. All right. Just a reminder of who we are. These first couple of slides, SNWA has a few different hats that we wear in terms of our responsibilities. Regionalizing water conservation programs, our future water supply planning, which is what I'm here to talk about today, water quality and treatment, the infrastructure to deliver water to our member agencies, and the protection of the environment from which those water resources are withdrawn. So, as you all are likely aware, our service area encompasses about 7 out of every 10 Nevadans, and a similar proportion of the state's gross state product. So this is just a brief overview of what the SNWA system looks like. We are the big pumps, the big pipes and the intakes, and the water treatment facilities associated with those. But we do not serve any customers other than our member agency utilities. And again, we tend to use water pretty wisely. There's always room for us to improve, but when we look across the state, we use less than 5% of the water available within the state of Nevada.
I'm a bit curious about that number. So 5% means that there's 5 to 6 million acre feet a year of water available in Nevada? And where exactly is that coming from?
That's primarily... the Colorado River portion of that is small, 300,000 acre feet. The rest is groundwater and surface water throughout the state.
When I called the state engineer's office, they said they didn't know how much groundwater there was in the aquifers. So what is that 5% based on? What are the uncertainties?
That's what's permitted within the state. This is actually a quote that Jason King gave in front of the legislature, who was our last state engineer. That's where we derive this data from.
Well, that's not deriving the data. That's just he said something to a bunch of legislators. I mean, are there any measurements that confirm these data?
Yeah, we've gone and verified that the statement was correct after he made it based upon what we can tell through the state system.
Meaning you actually have measurements of the water in the aquifers? Because when I asked them, they told me, no, we can permit anything.
This is based upon the water permitted for use within the state, not the water resource availability within the state.
But that's not what it says there. It says water available for use in Nevada. It doesn't say water permitted. That's a different thing, what you're telling me, to what it says on the slide.
I think that's a distinction without a difference, but regardless, I've clarified the meaning of the slide.
Okay, well, you're on TV, recorded as saying that, so fair enough.
So Moving on, we receive about 1.8% of the permitted water on the Colorado River, which is the 300,000 acre feet state allocation. And Southern Nevada is nearly fully reliant upon that water to meet our needs. The other 10% of our water today comes from groundwater within the Las Vegas Valley. And as you all know, the Colorado River has been affected by drought conditions and climate change, which are visibly apparent, particularly as we look at lake elevations across the last 20 years, which have fallen more than 100 feet from the near full elevations that we experienced in the early 80s and at the turn of the century.
Do you have an indication of how much the snowpack is? Do you have any idea what the current snowpack is in the Rockies based on all the weather we've had this year?
I do, and if you give me 1 second, I forgot to bring my folder.
I know, last I'd heard it was around 120%, but I'm just wondering if that's the part that's going into the river, or?
Yeah, I know we're about average. It's still quite early in the year, but I don't want to misquote, so I'm going to look at my water supply report just to make sure. So the precipitation to date in the upper Colorado River Basin is 90% of average, but our total snowpack is 110% of average.
Let's hope it keeps coming.
Yeah, still quite early in the year, but good indication thus far. So we've been preparing for drought and preparing our water resource plan for decades. It includes 4 major components for addressing how we meet the community's needs. And again, I'm here today focusing on resource planning. So infrastructure may not seem to have a direct implication to our water resource plan, but in this case it does. We began pursuing major facilities in 2005 that would allow us to take water out of the lake as it continued to decline. So as you look at this graphic, prior to 2005, the only infrastructure we had in Lake Mead was intake number 1 and intake number 2. The elevation of intake 2 is at elevation 1,000 feet. So we invested about $1.4 billion in building the 3rd intake so that we could continue to take water out as the lake dropped. So the finished elevation of intake number 3 is 860 feet. That essentially allows us to take water from the lake even when water cannot be released downstream of Hoover Dam. So just some major components of that project. It's pretty remarkable, but I won't get into all the details. It was an engineering feat to get there, and we did it on schedule and under budget. So that intake was made operational in 2015. And again, the primary purpose is water quality of the intake itself. The pump station is what allows us the deeper pumping capacity. And this portion of the project, the intake was $817 million. So just so you know what you're looking at here, that bottom left picture is the path that the intake tunnel takes out from Saddle Island and into Lake Mead. Moving to the right, that's a picture of that intake tunnel during construction. Moving to the right again, that's the cutter face of the tunnel boring machine that was used to drill the intake structure. And then on the top right, that is the riser shaft that is now concreted into the bottom of Lake Mead, where the water flows into the intake. So now we talk about the lower lake level pumping station, which is the other $650 million of that project. We're over 90% complete on this project today, but this is the pumps that are essentially set lower down as well to enable us to not only bring the water in from deeper in the lake, but also pump that water out. And that will allow us to pump as low as 875 feet. So here we just have, again, a few more pictures. The bottom left is the intake forebay. We move up, and this is some of the surface piping that brings the water into the water treatment plants. The next picture to the right is just a schematic of the different zones at which our intake pump stations will serve based upon Lake Mead elevations. The right is pump installation, the next to the right, and then the final one in the top right corner, I believe, is how they had to prop up the BMI raw water line in order to put our infrastructure underneath it. So a pretty exciting project for all of our engineers. So other things that we've been working on that help bolster our water supply are the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan. We talked about this a little bit at the last presentation in terms of our water conservation plan, so I won't go into a ton of detail here again, but essentially it was designed to be a series of checks and balances that allowed more flexibility and coupled that with reduced water use as Lake Mead declines. For the first time, it includes California as a participant in using less water as the lake goes down. And again, it has those incentives for us to store water within the reservoir system instead of taking it off stream.
Question, is California at the same level of percentage participation the rest of us are?
No, they come into the system later. So there's a lot in the law that dictates how the policy is created. And essentially, when the Central Arizona Project was constructed, which is the main municipal supply to Phoenix, Tucson, as well as the agriculture in those areas, they had to go to Congress and seek federal appropriations to build that project. And at the time, the bargaining chip that California got with a much larger share of the Electoral College than Arizona was, we will agree to fund this project if you agree to take the junior priority on the river. So essentially, the way the law reads is that California would not have to take any more reductions than it would have if the project did not exist. So essentially that about 1.8 million acre feet of Arizona's 2.8 million acre foot allocation would need to be reduced from Arizona until California makes a contribution. That is not what the DCP negotiated. What it did was it leveraged the fact that California would like to store water in Lake Mead. It's a cheap storage option from them. They would like the ability under dire circumstances to get some of that water out of Lake Mead. So when Arizona is taking about 1 million acre feet of reductions under the DCP, which occurs at elevation 1045, then California starts coming into the picture, and they ramp up to a 400,000 acre foot reduction as the lake goes down.
I think another key issue, I'm sure you got more facts than I did, but from what I remember is that California has higher priorities, as you stated, in the take of the water, and most of it's irrigation. They have a higher amount of irrigation, and Nevada has almost all domestic water. So my understanding is the reductions are more related to domestic water than it is irrigation.
Yeah.
At least in that first cut, and in the current.
Yeah, it's a little complicated in that regard, but there are what's known as present perfected rights. So those are the rights that were being used at the time that the decree was entered into. And California by far has more of those than any other state volumetrically and as a percentage of their allocation. Prior to Arizona seeking that additional water for the Central Arizona Project, they had been in litigation with California for over 40 years on the interpretation of how water would be shorted. And what the Supreme Court ruled right before Arizona traded away was that everyone would go equally until you hit those present perfected rights, or proportionally. So when Nevada calculates what we share the same proportion that we would have shared had California and Arizona participated. And Arizona takes California and Arizona shortage until we get to these deeper elevations where California then begins to participate. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question, more importantly?
No, that helped clarify more, just to, 'cause it is complicated since it started in 1920.
Yes.
And then I think it was, 1964 was when the Supreme Court declaration finalized the water aspect.
Yeah, I think that your year is, I don't know if it's correct off the top of my
within
head, but it's close.
approximation.
Yep.
But, so, okay, sorry.
Larry, do you mind pulling your mic down just a little bit?
Another question along those lines, and you may get maybe another place further down where we could talk about this, but has there ever been any discussion about possibly supplementing the Colorado River supply with desalinated water out of Southern California that these upper states could participate in some of the costing on, so that we can increase our allocation out of the river and let California take it out of the ocean if we help pay for it?
Yeah, we actually include desalination in our water resource plan, and we'll have some brief slides on that. Nevada currently is pursuing not a desalination, but a water reuse opportunity with California, where we would partner in a water reuse project that California is doing in exchange for a portion of the water. So they essentially would create a new resource within California through that water reuse project. And by doing so, it would reduce their Colorado River pumping by so much to allow us to take the same. It's actually a little bit cheaper than it would be to do desalination. And as you know, there's desalination in place. Generally, those things are small volume. I think 100 million gallons per day is the largest desalination plant that exists. Just for reference, our current pumping capacity is 900 million gallons a day. So it takes a long way to build the system to be reliable based upon desal. But I think it's one of those, we're going to need a little of this and a little of that and a little of this to solve the problem, and we are working towards desal options.
So I had a question. What are the cuts envisaged by the DCP? I looked up those numbers, but I can't remember them. Like right now, what is the decrease in usage for the whole system?
I think that's on my next slide for Nevada.
No, I mean for the whole system, everybody.
At the bottom, I don't have in my presentation the chart that shows every single state's reduction as it adds up together. We get upwards of 2 million acre feet across Arizona, California, Nevada, and Mexico when we get to the deepest elevations, and I can share that.
The reason I asked that
Spreadsheet.
question is the flows in the 20th century, at least the natural flows at least vary, were 15 million acre feet a year. The flows this century are 12 million acre feet a year. So we already have a deficit of at least 3 million acre feet, contrary to what you say in your report, which is that it's envisaged that maybe by 2060 there might be a deficit of 3 million acre feet a year. We already have that between what's allocated and what's coming in. And you're saying, well, eventually, if things get really bad, then we might have saved less than that deficit. Well, things are already really bad. We're already in that situation. So it seems to me the drought contingency plan is bound to fail. It can't work.
Well, we talk later in this presentation about how we factor changing inflows to the Colorado River into our future planning. The drought contingency plan is not and was never intended to be long-term policy. The drought contingency plan is set to be implemented through 2026, which is when the guidelines on the river expire. It was essentially a Band-Aid that was placed on top of the additional guidelines to ensure that we wouldn't have catastrophe while we were negotiating the next set of policy. So to characterize that we didn't do enough over the next 6 years, I would have to push back. The drought contingency plan is more than adequate to address the risk we may face in the next 6 years. I agree completely that we likely have to do more in the future.
I mean, 18 million acre feet of deficit in the next 6 years. If a 3 million acre feet a year deficit keeps accumulating, and you're saying we're going to adjust by, 300,000 acre feet a year or something, I would dispute even that. It might get you to 2026 if you start really draining the reservoirs. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And in any case, you don't even know the evaporation rates of Lake Mead. What are the at the last session, you quoted a figure of 3%. What is that based on?
No.
3% a year. No, that's not true. It's in the minutes.
No, what I shared with you was the reduction that occurs for ICS that is stored under the guidelines prior to the drought contingency plan.
That's 10%, right?
No. So after the drought contingency plan, I intentionally created surplus that is stored in Lake Mead is reduced by one-time cut of 10%.
Right, that's what you told us.
The evaporation Prior to that it was essentially assessed a 3% a year reduction in the balance of your ICS. That is not the total evaporation of Lake Mead.
Which is what, according to you?
The total evaporation of Lake Mead is measured, varies between 5.8 to 6.5 feet per year.
Which is what, an acre feet?
Which depends upon the surface area of Lake Mead. So today the surface area of Lake Mead is about 84,000 acres.
But I mean, you must have measured that number, right? Have you measured it? And
yes,
what's that number based on?
The Bureau of Reclamation measures that. So I think you're confusing or perhaps conflating what the metrics are for these system values, what the policy is that's created to address those. So the 3% per year is negotiated policy, which is an attempt to find a simplistic way to address a widely variable natural system. But the 3% a year is not an exact match.
What matters is the actual number at the end of the day. Water is a real quantity. It's not determined by laws. It's a physical amount of water.
But I think, to support SNWA and to help with the situation, from my understanding, from dealing with the different states, I think they made a lot of progress in the drought contingency plan because there was no law that mandated that anybody even had to come to the table. It was just a matter of everybody trying to conserve. So almost anything they gained was a positive aspect. Now that might be more needed, but I think if I'm almost hearing right, we're talking apples and oranges. We need some of the data that you're looking for. So you're looking for certain data, and I can appreciate that. But I think as far as the drought contingency plan, they're not necessarily the same thing because you've got the plan is what I believe probably the best you could have done with the group you had at this time as a Band-Aid. And so if you're saying you got evaporation, this and that, and can you have done more, you've got to convince the group that it has to be done because there's no law to mandate they have to do it. So
right.
It's all pure negotiation. And so some of the stuff you're looking for would be something more in the future, but it really, you're distracting from what I think or misunderstanding what the contingency drought plan is really trying to do.
Yeah. And
I think what it's trying to do is they're desperately trying to get themselves to 2026 when they think they're going to renegotiate everything. Is that correct or is that wrong?
I wouldn't say desperately.
Well, let's say I give you an A, and I'm not trying to grade you. In any case, it's not your work. But I'm saying our policies have to be based on physical numbers that actually correspond to some reality. Otherwise, we can congratulate ourselves and give us all the medals we want. It's not going to work.
Well, the policy is. There's an extensive modeling effort that goes into developing the policy.
Not really, actually. I've
actually, I run the model.
Yeah, but your models don't work. And the information you have in your document is incorrect.
With the presenter.
No, she ran the models.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is we don't need to argue with the presentation. If you went in the last council meeting, there's an SNWA O&M contract that has all the numbers and percentages. I'm sorry for not having the mic on, that have all the numbers and percentages that you're looking for. Okay, I'm looking at it right now.
No, I've read the report and the information is incorrect.
65-page document?
Yes.
That was in the last council meeting.
Not the last council meeting, but the report she's referring to.
There's another report that has all the contractual obligations and all the players in this report that I read, and I sent you an excerpt out of that, and that's where that excerpt is from.
I read that excerpt, but what I'm arguing is the actual numbers in their resource report where they actually did the modeling. You base yourself on the supply and demand study partially from BOR, right? Is that correct or not?
No, the Colorado River model is updated with new information every single year. So it's the Colorado River Simulation System model. It's maintained by the Bureau of Reclamation. It's been confirmed as the best available science for evaluating future policy on the river. If you'd like to debate that, that's a much bigger debate than me. That's a model that all 7 states and all of the major water users buy into to evaluate policy. That policy contains within it all of the operational rules that we're considering, as well as the evaporation from Lake Mead. It can be run with different hydrologies to stimulate more or less reduction, more or less inflow, more or less water use, and that's what's used to evaluate the policy that created the drought contingency.
Well, I think I'm
plan.
trying everyone's patience. So in the interest, I'll just say we can't both be right. Either you're right or I'm right, and we'll see in 5 years' time who was right.
All right.
Are you putting money on this, or?
Do we have somebody in Vegas that's willing to take that wager?
I'm betting on the laws of physics. You're betting on politics. We'll see who's right.
I don't believe that to be true. And just for the record, it's an unfair characterization to say that there was not sound science that went into that. And you disagree with that.
I would suggest you read this book, which you're quoted in. You must know this guy. It's 100 years of ignoring the science. I'm sorry. And I'm done. I don't want to interrupt the proceedings anymore.
It's very easy to criticize from the sideline, as Mr. Fleck so often does. So I'm not insulting him. He's quite a good friend of mine.
It's not easy to criticize from the sideline, actually, at all, because I do it, and it's not an easy thing to do, as you're witnessing this evening, which is what I'm trying to do and being shut down. So it's not easy at all.
Okay, so I'm going to move on because obviously we disagree here. We're looking at what we have here is how those reductions play out for the state of Nevada in terms of the water availability as Lake Mead goes down. So under the current drought contingency plan combined with the shortages before, the maximum reduction we take is a 30,000 acre foot reduction in our Colorado River supply. If we look at our 2018 use, that number is 244,000 acre feet. So we have quite a bit of barrier between where we are using water today and what our deepest reductions to our allocation are in the future. So here we look at the water that makes up what we call our temporary resources. So as we look in the water resource plan, we have our permanent resources. Those begin to be exhausted, and we bring in temporary resources, which are essentially your savings account. It's a one-time value of water that can be taken out. And here we have all of the water that's stored throughout various locations in the Southwest, the water we have in California, the water we have stored in our own local aquifer, the water we have stored in Arizona, and the ICS is the water we have stored in Lake Mead. I don't know why that Southern Nevada Water Bank number is not populated there. It's about 330,000 acre feet also.
So what you're looking at here is roughly, we have almost 8 years worth of water in the river at the present usage if things were to go bad.
Exactly.
In the lake, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't take, there's different restrictions on each of those buckets of water for how much we can take every single year. But yes, volumetrically, you're correct. We have about 8 years of our needs stored within various storage banks throughout the valley. So then we can't really talk about our water resource plan and the way it's built without the reminder that we recycle nearly all of the water that's used indoors. So we focus on our outdoor water use, what we call our consumptive water uses. That's how our 300,000 acre foot allocation is measured, is the consumptive use of water. So we withdraw more than 300,000 acre feet in a year. We return that water back. That's treated wastewater, and the delta between the two is the depletion we are charged with. And so that's why our water conservation programs are more specific to outdoor use than most other southwestern cities, where they don't have the opportunity to return their wastewater back to the source. So again, we went through our conservation programs extensively at the last meeting, and they're captured very well in our water conservation plan. But we use sort of that 4-tiered approach again to conservation regulations. So those are development codes that address both existing and all new development. So those are things such as there is no turf allowed in the front yard of any new development. Only 50% of the backyard can have turf. There's no turf allowed in any sort of non-residential application excepting schools and parks. So those are the types of development code that we talk about when we talk about regulations. Programs are the things where we pay people to change behavior. Those are incentives like paying people to remove turf. Pricing is primarily the tiered water pricing, the tiered water rates that we have, where customers are charged more as their use increases to encourage water conservation. And then a whole slew of education and outreach programs where we try and remind people to conserve water, make them aware of the programs we have, and just overall create that conservation ethic within Southern Nevada. So we know these things have worked. I think this was in the water conservation PowerPoint as well, but our population is up 46%. Our per capita use is down 46%, down by about 25% from the river over that time. So this is now where we get into the meat and potatoes of our water resource plan. What we have here, we use a scenario planning approach in our water resource planning. So we vary the water demand and the water supply in our water resource portfolio. And this is essentially the 3 water demand scenarios that we use. So if you look at the bottom line, I'll start there. That's called our lower demand scenario. So that's using the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Center for Business and Economic Research model that projects population growth within the valley. We take that population growth, we multiply it by a per person use of water, which we call gallons per capita per day, and we turn that into a water demand in acre feet. Embedded within that lower water demand is us achieving various conservation goals. So that gallons per capita per day assumes we hit our water conservation goal of 105 gallons per capita per day by 2035, and then extend further to 100 gallons per capita per day by 2055. Then I'm going to ask you to look at the top. Sorry, did you have a question? Okay, then if you look at the top line there, we have what's called the upper demand slide. So we take the historical error that we've seen in that population forecast. We apply a 15% increase in their population forecast by 2035, a 25% increase by 2055, and we come up with that upper demand line. Then if you look at the middle line, we take that same increased population projection and we assume that we increase water conservation. So instead of having 105 gallons per capita per day use by 2035, we assume we get down to 98. And then by 2055, instead of assuming 100 gallons per capita per day, we assume we get down to 92. So this gives you a good understanding, or at least a feel for how conservation affects the amount of water that we need for the community. So then moving on.
Actually, I had a question about that slide, because at the last presentation, you claimed that you had proven that urban growth was decoupled from water usage, meaning we can grow and we don't need more water. But your previous slide isn't consistent with that. You say we're going to grow and we're going to need more water. Is that correct?
I believe what I had said is over recent years, we have shown that you don't always need more water to.
Well, you use the word proven, but it's okay. You'd shown, okay.
That is
but
true.
Not in the future, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, to date, that is true. We've grown by 46%, and we're using 46% less water per capita.
Fair enough. And what's the per capita usage in the United States for water?
I do not know. And typically, we don't compare GPCD calculations outside of our service area. It's a good metric for assessing progress within your community. They're typically pretty poor metrics for comparing across communities, because as you can imagine, each community has kind of a different set of resource availability, how they reuse their wastewater, where they reuse their wastewater. So we use it to benchmark ourselves, but not really to compare to others.
It's about 60 gallons per person per day. So we're living right now in the biggest drought in recorded history, in one of the deserts in the world, and you're saying your ambition is to reduce consumption to 150% of the national average, if we're lucky, just, as a calibration, with your saying, well, yes, we're different to other communities. Yes, we are. We're very different to other communities for the reasons I've explained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're also the driest state in the nation. So where we need to include within our gallon per capita per day assumptions is the water that goes to everyone's landscaping, whereas the majority of the United States doesn't have sprinklers. So that doesn't factor into their gallon per capita per day use.
And we're also at 600 here in Boulder City, by the way, which is 10 times the national average, just for the record.
Oops, you're good. So I'm going to move on here. So this is how we portray different hydrologic scenarios on the Colorado River. Today, prior to this 2019 Water Resource Plan, this scenario planning portion looked a lot different. We had sort of these on-off scenarios where we looked at 100% of our water supply every single year, or the deepest shortage that we had every single year. We've taken that approach and modified it a little bit this year by looking at specific hydrologic traces or different periods of inflow from the Colorado River based upon the long-term average. So here we extract from the Bureau of Reclamation's model what we consider to be an average hydrology, a dry hydrology, an extremely dry hydrology, and what we categorize as a climate change hydrology. So what you're looking at here is the lake elevations. The green and the red bars represent where those increases in reductions to our allocation occur. If you remember, we had that table that showed we stepped down from 300,000 at various lake elevations to 270. So these are just those lines at which the reductions occur. So as we evaluate our water resources, we do it dynamically. We look every single year at what the lake's elevation is to determine how much water we would have available, and then demonstrate what water resources we have to meet those needs. So now I'm going to transition into showing what that looks like in terms of water resources. Now we have a total of 12 scenarios in our water resource plan. I have only put 3 in here. We have more that we can show you if you're interested. We can certainly provide copies of our plans, but it gets a little monotonous to go through all 12.
So I had a question on the previous slide about the climate change hydrology.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, climate change is very uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. It depends on the emissions. As you've acknowledged to your credit, here I will credit you, you finally agreed, admittedly 50 years too late, that climate change is real and it's man-made, which we've known for a very long time. And so that's good. I credit you for that. But climate change is not just one trace. And so just drawing a line on a thing and saying this is what we think will happen under climate change is very misleading. There are huge uncertainties.
There are.
What is that trace based on? I mean, it's in your report. I've tried to read your report, but just for the record.
So this is, these are representative hydrologies. They are not a projection of what the future will be. What we did in this hydrology scenario is we tried essentially to find, when you look at the average hydrology that's on there, that scenario results in, over the 50-year time period of our resource plan, an average annual flow of 14.8 million acre feet, which is the current observed average annual natural flow of the river since 1906, when record keeping began. Then we step down. When you move to the dry hydrology, that produces an average annual flow into the river of 14.1 million acre feet. Then we move down again, extremely dry, moves to 13.7 million acre feet. And then when we move further down to climate change, that hydrologic trace essentially produces 12.9 million acre feet of runoff through the 50-year planning horizon. So in order to create that hydrology, and that trace for us to analyze, we take the driest 25-year period in record and we put it back to back. That's essentially how we come up with that scenario. So is there a million other ways this could play out? Yes. But realistically, when you look at it here, the largest reduction we take is under, this doesn't work up there, is under that bottom red line. That's the maximum that our Colorado River apportionment is reduced. So regardless of the lake elevation, how far it goes below that line, our resource availability does not change.
But all those numbers you've quoted, and again, I don't want to try my colleagues' patience or yours too much, are actually higher than what has actually happened. What happened this century is lower than even your worst case scenario.
Yeah, I
and
mean,
so you're
that's-
saying climate change isn't going to make things worse in this scenario. It doesn't make any sense.
That's true, but that's not to say that this isn't informed by science. The current
I didn't say it wasn't
drought-
informed by science. I said it's not a rigorous. When you're looking at risk, you want to look at the worst case scenario. When you put those towers up to build the bridge across the Colorado River, they blew over. It wasn't the average wind that mattered. It was the worst wind gust that mattered. It matters how vulnerable are you to the worst events. So looking at these average events that don't even represent what has happened in the last 20 years as a fair case of looking into the future is completely misleading, in my humble opinion. We can disagree on this.
Well, and just so that everyone else understands, the current drought, so from 2000 till today, has produced an average of 12.4 million acre feet of runoff. This assumes that we test 12.9 million acre feet. Based on based upon the downscaled global climate model projections, this is almost into the lower quartile of those projections. It's not quite into the lower quartile. So about 70% of the climate change projections are showing that we will have more runoff than is in this scenario. Is it the worst case? No. Is it a severe case? Absolutely.
Yeah, but the problem is those downscaled climate change projections don't work. I've actually looked at the CMIP-5 and the CMIP-3 models. This is what you say when you say it's easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize. I've actually looked at those models that you're referring to in order to produce that graph, and they don't work. They don't reproduce what was seen in the past, not one single one of them.
Yeah, but
So
George, I think we need to really be careful. We are pushing the patience of everybody here. Because, again, we understand your point of view, but if you look at the document and what they're trying to get at, because as you've said, well, the Bureau of Reclamation does, 100 traces to do different things, and it all depends on what you're trying to get at. So they're taking a specific aspect, a specific time to do a specific report. So I think what you really need is more of a dialogue with more of the colleagues, I think, of your understanding to get into what...
I have had a dialogue with them. I had an extensive meeting with the guys who wrote the BOR supply and demand study on which this is based. It all goes off the rails if you're not willing to look at the details. I mean, it's all very fine to draw squiggly lines on a piece of paper, but what matters is what actually happens. This is the real world. When the scientists say, don't launch the Space Shuttle Challenger because it's a risk, it says, well, is it a risk on average? Well, either the shuttle blows up or it doesn't. Either this system blows up or it doesn't. And so we're placing bets. Like Dennis said, do we want to bet? I'm willing to bet that we're heading for trouble when what you're presenting here is a kind of analysis we're using to make decisions. Because it's grossly, you wouldn't risk your retirement package on this kind of analysis. I'll bet that.
But I think what you're trying to point out, so sorry not to help just put words in your mouth, but you were stating that that line was the worst amount we would get, even no matter how it went down. The red line is we would get 270,000 acre feet, and that's one of our resources. And then I think you're going to get into more of our resources that we have available to us, if I'm understanding correctly.
Right.
So this is a scenario of it. We can appreciate where you're coming from as trying to look at it, but again, I don't think this is the area. This is not the meeting to go into the detail. I think the best way to do it, unless I'm understanding, is that I think we can agree to disagree. And then if you can find a way, as you have talked to the Bureau of Reclamation, if you can talk to SNWA in a different avenue, that might be the better way to do it, if that helps at all.
Yeah, and we are not climate scientists. We use the best available science that comes out of the science community.
I'm not convinced by that, because what they are producing is not the best available science. I've read their reports. I'm happy to talk to you and explain to you. I'm a rational person. I don't have it in for you personally. I think we're taking a huge gamble here based on, I know these guys aren't scientists. I'm the only scientist in the room. But we're taking a gigantic gamble here that maybe you're unaware of.
Oh.
And you're not aware of the risks that you're taking. I'm sorry. That's, we'll agree to disagree. I'm on board with that.
And I would certainly guess that SNWA, like the Bureau and the Colorado River Commission, would be glad to sit down with you independently and discuss this further.
One last thing I would say is with the supply and demand study was in 2012. You've referred to their median projection in your report, your resource report. 2012 to 2019 is 7 years. You can see how accurate their projections were. They were they were optimistic. That blue median line that you refer to in your report is not what happened. So we can actually test these things. That's what I would say. That's something we can agree on, I would hope. These are testable models.
The scenarios that you see here today are from a 2018 run of the Colorado River Simulation System model. They are not from the 2012 supply and demand scenario. So this is an updated model since that time. What we use within our resource plan is characterizing the science at a third grade level. We try to write that resource plan at a third grade level so that the bulk of the public can understand it. So those statistics from the 2012 study are very easy for people to understand. And that's why they're included. They're widely publicly available, and they're meant to capture the sentiment that we know there's less water available on this system in the future. I don't think there's a policy debate that needs to occur with that. So I'll go here today. Again, I mentioned there's 12 scenarios in our resource plan, and I do not show them all. I show 3. Again, we have more. I'm happy to walk you through them, but just trying to capture some of this. I don't show you the lower demand scenario. Under almost all of the lower demand scenarios, we don't need any additional water. So should population growth be low, under even the most trying hydrology, we really don't need to tap into our temporary resources until the end of the planning horizon. So when you look at the upper demand scenario, so again, this is more population growth than the models are currently projecting. What you see on the right is the permanent resources are in blue. You'll notice that volume changes on an annual basis, and that's based upon the lake elevation you're seeing on the left-hand side. What then comes in green is how we utilize those temporary resources, that 8 years of supply that we have in our savings account. And then once we exhaust those supplies, we move into the category of future resources, which is where we explore things like desalination and other water supply alternatives to meet our future needs. So then I'm going to advance to the next scenario we show you. So we skip from that average hydrology all the way down to what we describe as a climate change scenario. And we look at the difference in how we would meet demand under that same upper demand population growth scenario. And you can see there, again, the green is when the temporary resources come online. The brownish color, brownish red, is when the future resources come online, and that's in about the 2045 timeframe. And then finally, just to demonstrate what water conservation does, I've shown you that additional conservation scenario for the same water supply and water demand scenario. So still looking at the climate change hydrology, still looking at the upper demand, but assume that we conserve more water. And you can see that reddish-brown future resource pushes out a lot further into the future, about 7 years. So the more water we conserve, the longer we delay the need for those more expensive future water supply projects. And that is, for the most part, the end. I'm going to shift, and I put in some slides. Dennis's request at the end to talk about Boulder City's allocation again. So this is a good time if you have questions on how we do this resource planning piece to ask now. All right. So we mentioned just previously, we talked about the SNWA cooperative agreement that we were formed by our 7 member agencies coming together and saying this is how we're going to work to address water supply in the region, and that occurred in 1991. Boulder City has a total of 18,742 acre-feet per year of water. And under that agreement, unused water is shared. And future resources are developed cooperatively amongst our member agencies. That was meant to avoid infighting between the different water purveyors as water resources became scarce. And that's the whole reason that SNWA was formed. We prepare an annual water budget, and the water resource plan slides that you've seen are updated and considered by our board every single year. So as I mentioned, this last year was the first year that we've included hydrologic traces for our water supply scenarios. I fully anticipate that the way that water resource plan looks will continue to evolve. If you go back to the first year, and I'll just click back for a second, there was a line that projected out for 20 years, and there was a ... and a question mark for how we met things beyond 20 years. So my point being, this planning document evolves significantly and is looked at every single year to address changes in hydrology, changes in our water supply, changes in policy on the river. So what we see today is not static for the next 50 years, nor is it the only look at how we're going to meet our supply and demand. So in 1960, following the transfer of Boulder City from federal control to municipal control, that was when Boulder City received their first entitlement of water on the Colorado River. It was just over 5,800 acre feet, and the priority date of that water is 1931, which is when the federal government initially put that water to use for the construction of Hoover Dam. So moving forward, the Southern Nevada Water Project, which is essentially our intake #1 that delivers water from Lake Mead, was constructed or proposed to be constructed in the 1960s. And what went along with that was repayment contracts for building that facility, as well as water supply contracts. And at that time, Boulder City was given up to 7,000 acre feet of water to be delivered from the first stage of that project. In 1977, the second stage of that project was built, and ultimately, as the water quantities and repayment schedules were renegotiated, Boulder City ultimately ended up entitled to 8,918 acre feet of water under their second contract. So the contract specific to Boulder City total 14,794 acre feet of water per year. Then, following the creation of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, additional water rights were assigned to Boulder City. Based upon the cooperative agreement, as SNWA acquired additional resources, there's a breakout for how those resources are shared amongst our purveyor members. And that's where the difference between the numbers that Councilman Rhee had and I had occur is the 3,948 acre feet entitled to Boulder City through contract with SNWA, not Boulder City contracts.
Yeah, I apologize for that. I am capable of admitting when I'm wrong, and I got those numbers from the Colorado River Commission. I think I've emailed back and forth with them, but that was incorrect what I said. So thanks for correcting me on that.
No problem.
Councilman, by the way, I'm a nobody. I'm just a citizen.
Well, and that's why I paused, is I know chairman, but I don't know what I call the rest of the committee members. I didn't know the proper name.
Quick question. Do we know where Boulder City is at currently?
Yeah, and that's my next slide.
I'm sorry, okay.
So this is just the history of Boulder City's use. It's been pretty constant, which you would expect in a community that's not growing. And it's ranged, all numbers within the 10,000 acre foot band.
And just real quick here, and even with the houses we've been adding at the cottages and Storybook, they're all the low flow fixtures, so it's still flat essentially.
Yep, and there's a forecast that's done every year looking forward through the SNWA water budget process. Again, that's a process we coordinate. We're required to coordinate through the cooperative agreement that gets updated annually, and that includes through 2022 a projection of use of 10,700 acre feet.
Excuse me, is this potable water we're talking about or non-potable, or both?
Total.
So in other words, this contract dated from 1996, Boulder City lateral of 19.4 million gallon per day, which is equivalent to 30 cubic feet per second maximum capacity of potable water. That's included in this number, and then the rest of it's non-potable, right?
That is correct, and I believe that's more a maximum day delivery capacity.
Have we ever hit that number?
No.
Thank you.
A well-engineered system should not hit that number.
And no, we're not, I don't even think we've been maybe 2/3.
All right. If there's no other questions, thank you again for the invitation.
Did you say you had the current elevation?
The current elevation of Lake Mead
Yes.
is 1094.
1094. Okay. And that actually, I believe, that elevation is probably being helped with this drought contingency plan. Is that?
Yeah, we hit an, Terry Fulp, who's the regional director of the Bureau of Reclamation, has this great saying that once we put an elevation within policy, we hover around that elevation suspiciously for years to come. 1090 is the threshold for which the first reduction occurs. And there's an interesting way that that's addressed within the drought contingency plan. So typically we use an August projection of the January 1st elevation. Then, what's different in the drought contingency plan is if we hit January 1st and the lake elevation has improved significantly to where that contribution would no longer be required, there's less restrictions on the way that water can be used in the future. So it relaxes a little bit. But what you're saying is absolutely true. Throughout the development of the drought contingency plan, the first MOU that was signed amongst the lower basin entities, essentially putting on paper that we needed to do more than the 2007 guidelines, was a memorandum of understanding entered into in 2014 that said we're cooperatively going to reduce our water use. So even last year, prior to the drought contingency plan, that was the lowest water use, I believe, since the 70s from the lower basin combined, which is directly a result of us working together to say we need to do more, and being cooperative and thinking ahead at doing more before we actually have to do more.
I'm curious, what's the lowest in this current drought, the last 5 years, whatever? What's the lowest elevation the lake got to? Or 1094 now? What did it get down
I believe we got down to 1074, 1073, 1074.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Well, I might have gotten down. I can't remember if it got down to into 1069 or something. Because I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's either that was what they anticipated. I was just trying to remember off the top of my head the 24-month study, and I thought it went down. Because what had happened is you'd go down into the summer would go down, and then you'd come back up.
Right.
So we didn't have to do this night to 1075 because as you stated before, it was January, but it did go.
We did go below it, and I don't know how far.
Yeah, I think we went below 1070. I think, but I maybe that was just an estimated and not what actually happened.
I keep those January elevations in my mind, and I knew we went before it because we got a lot of media inquiries. Where's the shortage? No, it's the January 1st elevation. I can get that information for you if you're interested. The Bureau keeps actually a daily record online that you can look up pretty easily.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is on, there we go. So I believe it's on slide 20. It's the one that shows the up and down arrows. So water use is down 46% and consumption is down 25%. Yes. Can you give any context on how that's played out in comparison to plans maybe 5 years ago? Are we ahead of plan? Are we behind plan on those kinds of consumption levels?
Yeah, so for better or for worse, there was not really a conservation plan prior to 2000.
Okay.
So when we built the water resource plan in 2000, there was no projection of future reductions in water use embedded in it. Certainly not the way that it's done today. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the first conservation goal that the community adopted was a 10 or 15 year out conservation goal. And we hit that within just a couple years, and Dennis may know some of this better than I did. He was living it at that time. So we blew that first conservation goal out of the water. Just where we're at today, we're at 113 gallons per capita per day was our 2018 use, and our goal is 105 by 2035.
Okay.
We've come down from over 210 gallons per capita per day since 2000, to put that into context. So we've reduced by almost 100 gallons per capita per day, and we've got another 8 to go to meet our goal in 2035.
Thank you.
So it actually sounds like we're in pretty good shape. I mean, the lake's coming back up. It could go back down, I understand. But the conservation goals are going the right direction too, so I think we're in good shape.
Yeah, I mean, as the person in charge of creating this document every year and putting into motion the water supply plans that we would need to meet our future needs, I think we're doing good, but I think we could always do a little more conservation. I like to put in context two of our biggest programs. We talked about the Water Smart Landscape program at the last meeting, and we break the turf out in the valley to what we call functional and non-functional. So the non-functional being stuff that people just look at. It's not in a park, it's not in somebody's backyard. And when we look at that 5,000 acres of non-functional turf, removing that alone would save the community 35,000 acre feet of water at a current use today of 244. Then the next thing we look to is our compliance with the watering schedule. Our compliance ranges from 25 to 60%, with people reducing their watering clock to only the number of days that they need. The potential in achieving like a 90% compliance rate valley-wide is that we would save 19,000 acre feet of water by doing that. So again, our use being 244, and just in those two conservation programs alone, we could get upward over 50,000 acre feet of water conservation. So we've got options. We need people to pursue them.
Let me throw something in here while we're on the subject. The Water Authority is currently going through, I think it's called ERPAC 3 now. And I think I was involved in the first two, but that's Integrated Resource Planning Advisory Committee that they have put together. I think there's about 20 members on that committee. I can't remember the exact number, from business and commercial and different Southern Nevada home builders, different representatives. Boulder City has a representative. They're currently including a number of water resource projects for consideration to go into their major capital program. Colby mentioned the one with working with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California on a major reuse project that would provide additional water for Southern Nevada. There's a project up in North Las Vegas that would be constructed to get the water that goes out to Apex back into the valley, so we would get that return flow credit. That's a significant capital improvement project, over $200 million. And included in that, and this is the real reason I'm mentioning it, is the potential for the effluent pump station that SNWA would construct to get our effluent up over the hill back into the lake, so that they could get that water resource. And so that process is currently ongoing. And, you know, that'll be a decision Boulder City will have to make in the very near future, whether they want to, you know, consider that project. And it's about $26 million.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and because you were here to answer basically what our water was for the contracts, and you definitely supplied that information.
Well,
So
glad I did. Thank you so much.
Appreciate the information.
Take care.
Thank you for your time. Okay, so see, Josh just stepped out for, that's what I figured. So I think I gave you guys a copy of so if we go back to item number 1 in the minutes, then we can start with the other minutes. He probably advantageous for him to be for the second minutes, but I'll just go over what I found on the first minutes, and then if anybody else found some additional information, then we can go through that also. Okay, so I guess we'll just go through. On item 2, really quickly, to answer some of Fred's issues, I think last time we did talk about more conservation and waste issues, especially for Boulder City. And I think at the last meeting, it was more or less that it's going to take some time. And I think for this committee especially, we're still trying to figure out get our information and still trying to figure out what we can do or should do, et cetera. So still trying to get what we can do, I think almost everybody. But hopefully we can look more in the near future instead of too long out, what Vegas can do or what even Boulder City can do to consider that conservation. Okay, so again, going back to agenda item number 1 and December 4th's minutes. So I guess I'll just go through what I have and then see what happens. Sorry to repeat. On page 1, agenda item 1, it states we talked about the minutes, and then in the third sentence, it went and described what changes were made for one set of minutes for September 23rd, but not all 3 sets of minutes. And the other ones were very lengthy, and unless we attach my changes to the minutes, I don't think we want to go into that much detail. So my suggestion is we just delete the changes that were made.
I concur.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on page 2, agenda item 2, I just want to make sure it's totally clear what the alleged violation was related to. And so we got Steve Morris, city attorney, stated that there was a possible meeting violation on item number 5 at the November 6, 2019 meeting. Then I would like to insert when item number 5 departed from the agenda when the committee took action to select subcommittees. I went back to the video and got that verbiage. So that states that we did not have it on the agenda, and that was our biggest problem to my understanding.
Yep.
With the existing language, it doesn't necessarily make sense to what the problem was. I think it's just a matter of the different, all the different meetings that you guys have to go through. I understand, so the terminology is which meeting is which, who are we dealing with, I understand that. Mr. Carr asked if the committee member had to write up a report, have the city council, so I think we would just say city, and look at it and have it come back to the committee meeting before anyone else saw this report. And I believe that I put the word meeting in because that's what I stated in the video. On page 3, a simple change, Mr. Moore suggested the chairman work, because that would work as going on in the future, worked would have been in the past. Page 4, Diana Pelter, finance director, gave the committee, not the council, a background on the item. Also, agenda item 3, committee member Ned Chameau asked if it was cheaper instead of were. Page 6, agenda item 4. Again, I think this hopefully helps quite a bit. Mr. Carr asked if the presentation bullet relating to the new development having to return wastewater to Lake Mead would affect Boulder City, since Boulder City has no means to return the wastewater to Lake Mead. Then after that was trying to make sure that it's clear too. Ms. Pellerino replied no, that it would only was only aimed at new development in areas that were outside of Boulder City. So instead of listing the areas she said, I just said it was outside Boulder City. Page 7, and on the very bottom of that, it was just one of the ones where it's another one where city committee. Page 8, we were talking about the, I forgot to give the agenda item on that one, sorry, but that was agenda item 5 or 6. Probably, I think that was 5. So we were talking about the report, and so instead of saying the item, just change item to report to City Council.
Okay.
Okay, and then the last one I have on that is that, again, on page 8, Mr. Porter stated a motion could be made to recommend, instead of it, the report, and then just can't delete, and the item would be complete. It didn't make sense for the, unless you had something in mind there. I think the last one I had, and I gotta get my point, I think I had a question on, page 10, do you have that handy?
Yep.
Okay, it says, Mr. Porter replied that the quarry used 300,000 gallons per day on average. So is it 300,000 gallon per day, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure it was per day.
Yep. We produce about 1.3 million gallons a day, and they use.
A day, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. So I couldn't.
I mean, it varies, but on average, that's about what it is.
Okay. Did anybody else have any other item on that December 4th? Okay. So Eileen, did you want to do your comments first, or do you want to do mine? Because I think you covered even more than I did on December 16th. Okay, I'll let you go first, and then actually, or maybe we can just go you go first, then I'll come.
For the minutes of December 16th, on the first page, down at the bottom, the word subsidizing was misspelled.
Mm-hmm.
Then on page 2, 5th line down, the word budgets was misspelled. Then on page 3, let me see. Mr. Drought continued the presentation. Down there in the middle, it says they made projections by taken, and it should be taking. And I gave up after that.
Okay, so I've got on page 3, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 12th paragraph down. It was, Mr. Carr was concerned the city was not using funding from old SIP projects. I think that would be SIP, the old SIF. I think it was some funding instead of projects. Because I was still trying to figure out, so it's the voter approved funds that I was trying to understand there. So I think that was the capital improvement fund compared to the capital improvement projects.
I gotcha. Okay.
Okay, on page 7, 2 up from the bottom. So the second sentence in there, the sheet was only for the water. It should be for it. The sheet was, and I probably want to put only, probably 4. So 4 before the, and the water should be electric, because the sheet that I handed out was just electric. It was not water.
Okay.
And on the top of page 8, Mr. Carr certified 1 column showed complete projects. So again, on that sheet, it was the top, certified the top showed complete projects and the bottom showed ongoing projects. Columns would confuse the issue. And that's all I had for that. So is there any?
Well, I just want to make it clear because we've discussed that these minutes are way too long. And so-and-so said, and then so-and-so said, and then so-and-so said. These 12-page minutes could be 3 or 4-page minutes. So you're taking steps to correct this.
That is correct, yes.
Can you clarify that for the
So
record?
the plan is, as soon as we get the, and we're going to have another conversation with the transcriber because we're asking for them to do part of it, and then we take it and do the rest of it as soon as we can get it from them, and then we'll get it out to the committee as soon as possible for a couple of different reasons. One, we don't forget what happened at the meeting because that's part of the problem. And then that gives the committee the opportunity to get comments back to us, get them cleaned up before they go on the packet, and then hopefully avoid the time it takes here to go through the minutes. The other option would be that we just do the minutes ourselves. But I thought we'd try the first option first, with us responding immediately and then getting them out to the committees well before the meeting, separate from the package to review.
What does it cost to have an outside agency do our minutes?
I don't have that number, but I can certainly get it for you.
Yeah, I think the second alternative to include us would be, let's start with that first. I'd appreciate
Okay.
that. Is that okay with everybody else? So, thank you, Eileen, for bringing that up, and thanks for, yeah, I think if we can condense these, it'll make everybody's life easier.
Yep.
So, okay. And then let's see, I guess, well, later on, we were talking a little bit some other ways to help try to streamline the process. I think that'll probably come into 6 and 7, so we'll go over that later. So right now, I guess we're on item number 3, presentation of the utility budgets. So do you have a slide show for that?
I do.
I think we need to approve the minutes.
Oh,
as
you're
amended
correct.
first.
Neglected
Good
on my
catch.
job, is that what I'm, okay, so so with the corrections made, the amendments made, does everybody agree that December 4th and December 16th minutes be approved?
I so move.
I second.
Okay, and, okay, now, so, sorry, second, now, for a vote, does everybody agree to be approved?
Aye.
Any opposed? So, does that make sure it's clear it was 100% approved? Thank you. Thanks, Eileen. Okay, so now we're on to 3. So Dennis, I guess you're presenting?
So the city has started the process of the FY21 operating budget process. So that you're seeing is a draft. There's a draft spreadsheet is attached. We're not planning on presenting it, but it's certainly there for your review. But just to hit on a few of the highlights with regards to the operating budget, the current budget as it sits has no new positions requested in it. And then you'll see my unless there, and that's because I'm going to talk about something just to get a reaction. We're not asking for any kind of response, yes or no, but we have had some questions from both mayor and council and maybe even somebody from the committee on can we do some of these projects or more of these projects in-house. So we've done a very high-level analysis. It's not a completely detailed analysis. It would be something we'd have to dive deeper into if we were going to consider it, but I thought it would just show you what it looks like and then talk about it a little bit. But so currently in the new operating budget, there's no new positions. We have added the vehicle replacement fund into each utility. And Eileen, for your information, when the city started this, they were considering just doing one fund and trying to keep the color of the dollars separate between the enterprise fund and the General fund, we just decided it's easier just to keep our own replacement fund in the enterprise funds, totally separate from the general fund, just to avoid that confusion. So I can get you more details on that replacement fund following our meeting that we're having next week, but we have added some of the some funding to each one of those funds and each of the utilities for this budget. I know you had asked that question, so, and you're certainly to ask more, sure. And of course, our focus in the budget is to support the goal to invest and maintain and make sure our infrastructure is reliable. In the electrical operating budget, it's basically flat. We do anticipate a slight decrease in our power purchases. We actually anticipate that for the next couple of years, and I'll talk about a little more of that in an upcoming agenda item.
Oh, sorry, I had one question on the previous slide and didn't catch fast enough. I guess I was a little confused when you're saying focus on is to support goal B, invest in the city's infrastructure. That should be more in each utility, not the administrative, shouldn't it?
Yeah, we're just covering that as overall.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused. I just wanted to see a whole lot more cost added to the admin cost relating to that. That just was a little confusing.
No, it's for the whole thing. It's for the whole utility.
Okay.
Versus putting it on every slide, and that's all that is.
Thank you.
And again, the electrical operating budget is basically flat. No new positions, no huge increases, no even minimum increases. It's basically the same. Again, we do anticipate slight decreases in power purchases. That's just basically because the Silver State's ability to, they're rolling basically 5-year contracts are cheaper than they've been in the past, so that's helpful for us, of course. The water operating budget, so to kind of go back to last year's budget, we added some fairly good size funds, at least good size for this utility in the water and electric and the sewer for the condition assessment work. So we've reduced those amounts because we do anticipate still requiring some professional services for various things. But the one that we are certain about is the federal government's mandated vulnerability assessment that's required in the next budget year. So there's money in there for that. Other than that, the overall budget's decreased slightly. We did just receive this year's anticipated increase from the Southern Nevada Water Authority, which this year it's 2.8%. And if you remember the way the Southern Nevada Water Authority has set their policy on the wholesale delivery charges, which is our water purchases, it's no less than 1.5% and no more than 4.5%, but it's based on the previous 12 months CPI. So that's where the 2.8% came from SNWA for both. So that's both on raw water and potable water.
Dennis, I think in one of the meetings we had here, and then some of the finance meetings that I've sat in with you on, I don't know if this is the time to ask or later on, but I'm not sure it has, is they've talked about advanced purchases of water. The city is advanced purchasing water. And that's how the amortization for the water in the spreadsheet was explained, that it was for purposes of water advanced purchasing.
If I remember correctly, that was an issue of, and I have to think for a little bit. I think that's where they had, and I'm going to have to get back to you on this, but I think what that was a mechanism for accounting for some of the purchase on intake 3. So they booked it differently, and I'd really have to go back to finance to because I know it's not there now. because it got addressed. But I'm pretty sure it had something to do with how Lake Intake 3 was funded and paid for.
Currently in the spreadsheets that's in the package, in water, there's $1.8 million of amortization. You have $1.3 million of depreciation and 1.8 of amortization. And it was explained that the amortization was dealing with advanced purchases of water. And so I think...
Yeah, I can tell you that the actual, and that's probably more of a finance question than this for me, but the actual water purchases are a separate line item in the water budget.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at, but my understanding is that is an expense, so it's going to reduce the revenues. And I think that's the thing that at the end of your presentation I'd like to talk quickly about too, is that's what's confused me greatly, is that I guess you've got certain mandated processes that certain forms are being filled out, or certain, not forms, but types of product that's being developed, financial documents.
Right, as far as reporting.
Correct, reports done, sorry. So I guess it's really confusing, and that's the one thing that I want to make sure that when we get the next draft, or at least the one after that, from the consultants related to the rate process, that we're all on the same page, because what I'm hearing is there's 2 or 3 different ways that this is falling out. We have the budget, we have actuals, we have things that are related to what the state mandates us to do and how it can be done. And so at the end also, I just want to address the depreciation, as Fred did, because that's another very confusing aspect, and to show it in one aspect and then saying, well, that's just for this report, but to make sure it's completely understood that it should not be an expense that reduces revenue.
Correct. And so both the finance director will be at the next meeting as well as the next workshop. And I think we certainly want to answer Mr. Volz's question with regards to depreciation and how it's managed in the budget versus how it's managed in the consultant's model.
Okay, yeah, because I guess it sounds like we need some additional reports, if not just for the committee, to make sure that we're understanding how all the funds are, basically how the revenue versus the expenses come out.
Right.
Because this spreadsheets aren't clear. Mm-hmm. It looks like there's additional expenses taken out that shouldn't be.
Right, and even when we get to when we get to see more of the product from the rate consultant from Raftalis Consulting, they'll explain how that does or doesn't fit into the model, and the difference between the model. The model is the financial planning, then it's more of cash flow than actual budgeted based on the work they do. And so those numbers, although they should be close, they won't always match up with budget, because they take information from us that is there may be a project that's budgeted in a single year, but it takes 18 months to get constructed by the time you select a consultant, do the design, do the construction. So it may be budgeted 1 year, but the actual cash flow is 18 months. So for them, we want the cash flow to be as accurate as possible, because that's really what affects the revenue requirements and potentially rates at the end of the day. So we'll be going through a lot of that information, and I think we certainly want to answer Mr. Volz's question as well. But I agree with you, it is a little confusing, especially for us non-accounting folks that don't have to deal with depreciation and all those other things. And I know in my past, it's the government accounting practices include depreciation for various reasons in their different reporting mechanisms and requirements that don't necessarily affect or impact the work that's done with the rate modeling. So, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that it is confusing.
I guess the one aspect to that too, since this is the draft or the starting point for the operational budget for 2021, and it does have depreciation in it. And this is, I guess, so before tonight's over, we need to discuss how we're going to handle, which I guess is either in 6 or the last 2 again, but handle what we have to get done before we do a vote on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day is on top of everything. So, but the trying to get everything understood, and again, if that's the way, because I think somebody was saying that it's Nevada's either rule or code or something that depreciation has to be shown, but we need to we need to understand how it shows and we don't want that the revenue is less, and make sure the city council understands what the revenue actually is.
Right.
So this might be the way that that the state is saying a way to do it, but it still seems very confusing. If this is the final numbers we're going to go with, is saying this is what your budget, we want you, and you've got over $3 million less because of depreciation, amortization, and stuff like that.
Right.
So, okay.
And again, I think if we need to do some one-on-one or one-on-two meetings with you, the chair and the vice chair, or 1 or 2 of the others, with finance, as we go through this process, to better understand the questions you're asking and then be able to answer them better at the following up meetings, I think that's always very helpful.
So Dennis and I had a brief conversation, and we're trying to figure out that might be a way to do it, is that Dennis and I and either one or other additional person from the committee meet with finance and have a few other meetings to try to figure out some of these questions, since we have a hard time with these committee meetings to get everything organized. So Dennis and I will talk more with that, and we can bring more information to the meeting with that. Does anybody have any concerns or comments with that?
That's a good idea.
Okay. So Dennis was applying that idea, and I appreciate that.
Just one hair-splitting comment again, but the water purchase increases 2.8%, but I see 2.3% for the consumer price index for last year. So is that last year? Or?
They use and I have to apologize, I don't have it with me. It's a specific, there's several of them. They use one, I think it's called the Western States something. I can get it for you, I just can't remember what it is.
It's 2.1%, so
it's one you pick and you say this is the one they're going to use, and that's how they set the policy, but I just don't remember which one it is.
I do have another question. The water purchases increased 2.8%, so that's the 21 budget increased over the 2020 budget?
Correct.
And that is the line that says water?
Yeah, and now just to make it clear, that we kind of look at, we try to look at water usage and what we think we're going to purchase, and we may not apply it directly to, because it's the actual expense is based on climate and weather and everything else, and how much we're actually going to purchase. So the 2.8 may not exactly match up to what we budgeted increase.
Okay, yeah, because this is 2.8 is like 4.6 million.
Yeah.
4.6 something, and this is 4.7, so it's higher than a 2.8% increase.
Right. So that's because when we budget, we like to be conservative, and we'll look at we're certainly open to modifying those numbers if they seem overzealous, if that's the right word. Wastewater operating budget, I believe it was reduced fairly significantly. Most of that was because we had money in there for the study for this year. We did leave $50,000 just, and I don't, it's there just in case something comes up that we need some professional services assistance on. But right now we have, there's not anything like with water, where we know we're going to have to do the EPA mandated vulnerability assessment and emergency response plan, we don't have a mandate, but we do like to have something in the budget there just in case something comes up.
So in the spreadsheet, so to make sure I'm understanding correctly, we have the rate study and we have the assessment right now.
Correct.
Rate study was that 200,000 or 250?
The rate study was, it was 200, the budget was 250, and the contract was a 198 and some change, I believe.
And that is divided among all 4 utilities or all 3?
We just covered that one under the administrative last year, so it was in the administrative budget.
Under professional?
Under professional or technical services, I can't remember which one, so.
Okay.
And then, of course, we put a portion of the condition assessment under the water budget and a portion under the wastewater sewer budget, and then we had a different number for the electrical pole integrity condition assessment program.
Okay, because I think it was the electrical, one of them had $200,000 in just one utility under professional or technical.
Yeah, so the electrical,
for this
the electrical
year.
also includes, because we typically utilize attorney services quite often with our contract negotiations on Hoover.
Oh, okay.
I don't anticipate a lot of that this year, but we do have money in the budget for that.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to understand the breakout and
Yeah,
between
yeah, so.
capital, professional, and technical, some of these projects that we're doing,
Right.
trying to figure out where it
And
falls
frankly,
out.
I don't know that historically we've been very consistent defining what the difference between professional is and technical is. And, you know, as far as I'm concerned, going forward, we could just use one name and put it all on the same. But I think what they've done is called professional more like attorney, and the technical being the consulting services. Is apparently how they broke it out. But historically, I've just called them all professional services in my experience, but that's the way they do it here, and it's not that big a deal.
Okay, thank you.
So that's kind of the summary on the wastewater side. Landfill operating budget, there was just an overall budget decrease of 3%. And all of a sudden, I can't remember exactly what the decrease was for. I think we just anticipated a little less expense on the operator side for the contract operations, just based on this year's expenses through the end of the year. So that's a very high-level summary. You know, please take time to look at those spreadsheets. You still have time to ask meetings. The next public, so just to give you an idea what the process is going forward for the city, there is a workshop, and I'm going to make sure I give you the right date. I think it's the 12th, which is next week. Yeah, I think, let me see.
That's in your timeline that you gave us a while back.
Yes,
That
I believe
workshop.
it's the 12th. I would need to get you the time, but we can send that out. to you.
It was Wednesday, but is that a public or is that city council?
I believe that is city council first.
We wouldn't even be invited to that then. That's not something we're invited to, is it?
Oh, yeah, no, you can come to that.
Okay.
Yeah, you can come to any of those, but,
I'll be here, but.
but we will, I want to make sure we have the right date and time, so we'll send that out. There it is. Say that one more time?
The 12th, 9 a.m.
The 12th at 9 a.m.
Workshop,
Okay.
Yep, okay, yeah, 12th at 9 a.m.
And then there's one there is a public one, correct? Is that the 24th?
Yeah, I don't know if that date still stood, but we can
Okay,
we can
okay.
we can get that date for you too.
1 o'clock on the 24th?
yeah, they changed it to 1, it was 2.
Okay.
Okay, they even were able to keep that same date. I'm impressed.
And then there was talk about a package for the utilities. Diana, I think, said something.
Oh, are you talking about the summary, the executive
I
summary?
think, is government summary or was something,
So-
package that would?
Yeah,
for
so,
utilities?
yeah, and that should be available as soon as tomorrow, I believe, so,
That'd be on the website?
yeah, and as soon as we'll get it, we'll just send it to you guys. So what it is they've taken a similar approach with the city's entire budget, where they create that executive summary document that's helpful in explaining the transfers and a lot of those things that are confusing. But it's just a summary. There's a separate one that is being produced and will be published tomorrow with regards to the utility and the enterprise fund. So as soon as they were finishing up tonight, I believe. So as soon as that's ready, we'll get you copies and you can have that as well.
Okay, thank you.
So now this is to maybe see the looks on your faces or to provide some input. As I said, this is a very high-level assessment. It would require some more, if we got nods that, yeah, this makes some sense, or no, we're crazy, then we would understand that as well, because it's not often you ask for 3.5 people at one time. But like I had stated, it had come off when we had moved forward with a couple of the different contracts, specifically the support services contract that was recently awarded for $900,000. Those questions had come up from council and maybe even once from this group. Can we do this stuff in-house, and what's going on with the market? So we just took a really high level, and I'll kind of show you how we did it, if I can get it. Oops. So we knew from a fact that with using, like a current support contract, we know what the hourly rates are for a senior lineman, which is the same thing as a foreman on the private side. A contracted lineman, we know what their loaded hourly rates are. We know what our loaded hourly rates are, which all of those are comparable. And if you just look at that, you can tell right away there's a significant difference, which, that's what happens when you contract out work. So if you look at the cost difference between a contracted foreman and a contracted lineman, it's fairly significant. So we took that, and again, this is we would need to dig and dive deeper, because we also do different types of projects, and the hourly rates probably aren't as high with those contractors. And what we would have to do is actually go back into the project files, because they are required to submit their prevailing wage and hourly rate information. And so we could dig deeper, and they're probably not, my suspicion is, and we're going to look because I'm curious, are they less than these contracted amounts? My suspicion is they are. So this may be a little liberal, especially with regards to what we're showing as the savings.
So Dennis, real quick on that slide, where it talks about hours worked, so a contracted foreman and a contracted lineman, we're using them all throughout the year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially, and we're comparing, the 120/80 work year, so. And essentially, that's how we've been using PAR electrical. So, and, we even show that going into FY21, so.
Question?
Yes.
Would these be permanent, long-term, or would they be 1, 2, 3 year?
I just had that feeling that somebody up there was going to ask that question. And so we need to talk about that, because, that's the risk, right? So let's kind of work through this real fast. So what we did was we took out, and because this needs to be explained, because that's not the electrical CIP budget. What we did is we took out, and FY20 obviously is the year that we're in, so that in that case, that would be a pretty good estimate about what the savings would have been for this fiscal year if we didn't contract out that $900,000. And we did that work in-house. That $700,000 is fairly accurate because that is PAR doing the year for the work for this year. They're doing that now. Obviously, moving forward, that will change. We tried, so the CIP numbers on the top are the projects we pulled out and estimated would be the ones we would do in-house, because there's still projects we're not going to do in-house. Even if we hired people, they would still be contracted out. We'd still do the BC tap, and the substation rebuilds. Those larger projects, the little more complex projects, we would most likely still do in-house. So we didn't even include those. This is most of the feeder projects, replacement projects, kind of those types of projects. It's not saying you couldn't do those, but we just didn't include them for purposes of the analysis.
Do you, can you tell us how many linemen we have, how many, what the staffing is right now?
It's about, shoot, I should have brought that. Oh, is it on? Oh, Marvis is right there. Yeah.
7 linemen, including the senior lineman.
Yep.
Including the senior lineman? Okay, and does that include the street light guy and the meter guy? And
Our street light guy, we run is a 50-50 split, 50-50 utilities, 50, because he's also our meterman.
okay,
So that's, currently we have a 50-50 utility, non-utility for that cost for the position.
and how about the substation people?
We have two full-time substation people and 1 non-utility electric. So we have a total of 11 in the electric division, excluding myself.
I can't remember how many, in the last 10 years, is that about what it was years ago, or? Okay,
We've only added actually 2 over the last 12 years.
okay,
Additional substation personnel and additional linemen.
okay, good, thank you.
So, again, what we did is we didn't sit there and say we're going to do every single CIP project. We just pulled out some that equated to about that number annually, and we just did that assessment on what that savings would be. Again, it's using PAR's numbers, which are relatively high, and I think my suspicion is that we dig back into some of the other project files, their hourly rates would be a little less, so that total savings to the city would be less. If we hired 3 line workers and a part-time streetlight serviceman. What we've found out, and what we certainly know with servicing the streetlights, is this city wants their streetlights repaired immediately, and we can't always get to them immediately. And so if we had 1 part-time dedicated streetlight repair person, that would certainly help with our ability to provide a higher service level, which we can't provide right now, and it doesn't make people happy.
So Dennis, I was curious, where it says cost of contracted equipment / material, there's not a similar type of a line item for the Boulder City cost. Is there some context?
No, and we anticipated it would be about the same, because it shouldn't change that much, although we do pay, you do pay for them to manage in the contract. There's typically a 10% or 15%, depending on the project, that would actually be less if we were purchasing the equipment.
Sure.
Versus them purchasing the equipment. So
in order to show
but
that,
I'm trying to make sure we're being careful with our numbers. And again, I want to remind everybody, this is very draft.
Sure.
It was just a first glance at, does this even make sense? Well, you look at this and you go, yeah, it seems to make sense, certainly for the first part of the capital program. But really, I think we would want to go in and do a deeper dive to make sure we're comfortable if we were going to ask for that. Right now, we're not even asking. Right now, the budget doesn't include any of this. It's really for our own, should we do this? And,
You know, I'd put my 2 cents in. I think it's a really good idea. Because contractors can cost money. I think, especially if you maybe bring them in for 2-3 years, something like that, without understanding. Or another thing some utilities do is they'll hire what they call as a dock crew. And you'll bring 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 maybe guys in to do specific jobs like pole replacement, cross-arm replacements. That's all they do. They use your equipment, you buy the material, and that's what they do. You pay them regular lineman wages. And then they know they're coming in. A lot of times they don't get benefits. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. They come in for 6 months, a year, whatever, and then they're done. They know, and they know that moving on. A few years ago, we actually hired 2 or 3 linemen on a temporary 2-3 year basis, and worked out very well. And so I think it's a good idea, personally.
And again, you know, you asked the question that we've asked ourselves already. You know, what do you do past 24? Well, we will know shortly what our pole replacement program should look like. And I suspect that's going to be an annual number of some sort that would help support this. And then, frankly, to be frank with the committee, Marvis, and he will tell you this if you ask him himself, because we don't have a very large staff, if we have one person on annual leave and somebody calls in sick, we're kind of, you know, that's how, you know, how lean the current staff is. So that would help with that kind of.
I was going to mention that too. It's nice to have, when you have an extended outage or an outage, and you have most of your people living in Vegas, if you have a storm and they can't get over the hill or something like that, it's sometimes nice to have a pool of people you can draw from, because...
Well, and even sometimes it's difficult when something like that happens, but they're working on another project. Yeah. They have to, you know, there's challenges with how do I leave and go address this emergency when I'm in the middle of this other project. So,
yep.
So, you know, I guess we're not asking for any kind of recommendation. We're just kind of thinking through this at this stage, and so any kind of feedback. What we've started to do is kind of put together a white paper that's more descriptive, and dig into the numbers and dive a little deeper. And the risk is exactly what you said. I think the thing that we've talked about internally is we would have the ability to track it. We would make sure we had the ability to track it with each capital project. I think we would have to talk to the rate consultant on what's the best way to do that, because we would have to start capitalizing that labor, because it's capitalized now as part of a contract. So how we manage it with the budget, and how our electrical guys would have to track their time. Right now, we don't have that ability. We'd have to figure it. So there's other parts of this that are more of the details you got to figure out how you're going to do from a budget perspective as well. You could certainly track it through the first portion to make sure it's doing what you said it did. I think the other thing you could look at is when that capital plan starts to go down in time, you could also look at attrition and manage it that way.
Yes, since you're looking for feedback, and it's clear that the contracted labor comes with a premium. And so if you know that you have a certain amount of defined projects over a certain period of time, then, and especially with the types of scenarios that Mr. Shamma was talking about, there's good opportunities to save some money.
Yeah, we did have, or I shouldn't say we did, but we did have some discussion with some folks at NV Energy, and this kind of analysis follows similar to what they do when they're looking at this. Clearly, they're a lot larger, and it's very different from Boulder City, but so I don't want to use them as the perfect model, but they do similar analysis.
I agree with Ned, and I think what the rest of the committee has indicated that some form of looking at the three, you might say is, one's permanent but I'm looking at the different alternatives, whether you say it's temporary with the opportunity of being permanent if the still there. So whatever we would put on when you're job request, yeah, sort of they know that it's a couple different ways, like you said. But if you just in your white paper, if you just maybe put in couple different options, and let the council could also see that might be a good way to look at it.
And again, I want to be cautious because I think the 700,000 might be a little high because we're using the PAR numbers. So when we dig into that a little more, that number could go down. But I still think there's going to be savings shown there.
I don't, as an old retired water and power contractor that used to work water and power, I was a civil servant, but I had over 20 exempt employees under me. And everyone had a different wage, different contract notes and everything else. It worked fantastic. We went 1 year from having 8 guys in construction to having over 600 in less than a year. So it can ebb and flow whatever you need. You go lease your equipment, you don't purchase it, you lease it. You lease it for a set amount of time for like a year, and you say at the end of the year, we want a new rig. Let the lease carry that, okay? And that's a direct write-off and a drop on the project cost. If you purchase it, then you got your depreciation. If you lease it, you're responsible for the oil, for the maintenance of it and stuff like that, which is not impossible to be done. But then you turn around, you're done with the equipment, you get it off the books. And like I said, I'd had numerous exempt employees working for me in 3 different states that I was responsible for, and it worked out really good. You're done with the project, they get laid off. That's it, you're done. Cut your costs.
One of my concerns from experience working for a city is that, like you just said, say you've got 3 people dedicated to capital improvement projects. What's to guarantee that that's all they work on?
Right.
Because one guy calls in sick, the other guy's on vacation. The next thing you know, you're pulling somebody off the projects to cover regular maintenance. And so that would have to be...
Right. And that is kind of one of the reasons we were cautious with how much of the CIP they would be responsible for, knowing that could possibly happen, so that we at least know we still have savings.
Because, the time it takes to do something will fill the amount of time you have, sort of.
No, yes.
So I'm a little bit hesitant to hire employees unless it was for a defined job and for a defined term.
Right. And again, we would have to develop that process and mechanism. We sort of do it now, and we don't, but they sort of do it now in Public Works with tracking their time because RTC is paying for folks' time in Public Works on some of these street process. So some of that's created. I think this would be a little more complicated. But again, we're getting feedback. That's what we asked for. And, I'm sure we'll get more feedback and more to come as we move forward. But
so, Dennis, did you say earlier that the foreman, for example, we're using that individual for a full year? Have we been doing that for multiple years?
Yeah, I believe we started PAR 18.
Okay.
And essentially they've been an extension of staff working on capital projects. So they're doing the same thing, it's just outsourced.
I just sort of, as an outsider, but you were saying the cost of the contractor might have been overestimated because you're using PAR's numbers, which are higher. than other numbers that you might get?
Well, I anticipate, because the PAR numbers are for, it's been pretty specific to the type of work we're done, and some of these projects are different from some of that work. It's the feeder projects, it's trenching, install conduit, and so that's going to be a little different. And so we would want to go back into those because we do have that information. It's buried in the files because the contractor's required to submit their information to the state because of the prevailing wage requirements. It's just something we've never done before, but that information is available for us to do it.
Then again,
So I think it would be different, a little bit different from PARS, but I'm saying that thinking, because they're a little bit different projects, but.
Then we sort of have three options, which is to hire permanent people, temporary people, or go with contractors. Is that the point? No, yes, no?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But when we're saying temporary, we're just saying over a defined term. So it's not, yeah.
I know what temporary means.
And I don't know, I don't know that this has been looked at in the past. They created, the capital plan was created and clearly the staff Marvis has today can't do all that work. So they recognize that.
But we sort of have these three options. Is that the issue, or it's two options? We don't know. Okay.
I guess the answer is yeah, you always have.
No, at present time, we have one option. We contract out the work. That's it. We've only
That's
got
true.
one option right now. What we're proposing and what they're looking at as a white paper is that we take and go for a specific time to hire employees at what they call cost plus benefits. Okay? Or we put them on as temporary employees on Boulder City staff.
And to answer that, you could try that, right? And whether the market works out that you could hire folks that are interested in the temporary work, that would be a positive, because then you don't have to worry about the issue of after 2024. Frankly, I'm not sure that's a risk. That's the issue is how much risk is after that. And depending on what the end capital plan looks like, may alleviate some of that. But
Another advantage is there are a lot of boomer linemen, they call them out there, that move around. And this is a great place to come in the wintertime. And you can schedule some of your big work in the wintertime, and these guys come in from the Midwest or places where it's miserable weather.
yeah, the crazy part of the market is right now is. And it's NV Energy, it's the entire West Coast because of the wildfire mitigation and management issues that go back to the Palisades fire and the PG&E thing. There's this huge effort now to improve infrastructure because that was part of the PG&E issue, and the PUCs of the different states have been all over the independent operated utilities to fix that. And so there is a premium right now on linemen, and we've been able to fill some vacancies where we had people leave, okay, and it would just be, we'd just have to figure it out.
Well, I think I don't know if the white paper would be a secondary aspect. If you did a three or so scenarios, you hire one full-time lineman, permanent, because it sounds like you have use for, just as you said, vacations, sickness, and stuff like that. Then you look at two volunteers, but you look at scenarios. Here's a scenario with all three permanent. Here's a scenario with one and volunteers. Here's a scenario. That way the groups can sort of
See what they look
see
like.
what it is. That would be a suggestion.
Okay. All right, well, appreciate the feedback. We'll kind of just continue to work on the white paper, and we are going to present this at the workshop just to see what kind of reaction we get from City Council. But those are good suggestions, so thank you.
So again, I guess the spreadsheet. So more of the information from the spreadsheet will be more at the workshops or after the workshops? Is that what we're, probably the best way to
Well, I
look
think,
at that?
as far as the detailed
Yep,
information in the capital, I think, you have some time to look at them. They'll be looking at them at the February 12th workshop. You can certainly get us any comments back before then. If you see something we have questions on, just email us. And then again, we can certainly put it on the March 6th agenda for continued discussion.
Yeah, I think we definitely want to do that. And I don't know if we need to vote on anything, so do we, and maybe we should just say, I don't know if we need to put possible action or discussion or whatever, just, I guess that's one thing we're gonna have to figure out with some of the future agendas, and then we'll get to that, I guess, when we get to the agenda.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was fair to you guys to say, hey, we want action tonight.
No,
The
I
first time
appreciate
we've seen it.
appreciate
So.
that. Was there any other comments, Keith, I guess I'll just go down the line, any more on this subject, this overall subject, George?
No.
Ned? No. Great. Okay, so then we'll move on. I wouldn't be surprised, we got another hour or so. Would somebody want a 5-minute break? Would that help? I think we can let's take a 5-minute break, keep it short, use the restroom if we need it, and call
Use
it.
the restroom fast. The next item will be quick, so.
So now we're on to the presentation, item number 4, the solar purchase letter.
Yes, thank you.
No, it's 4.
That's 4. So in your package, you'll see a letter from us, from me, actually, to Scott Krantz, who you remember came in with Silver State Energy Association and did a presentation. So before I jump into the letter, I'll give you a little bit of background information. You guys obviously all know that we lease out lots of land for solar projects. The last project we bid out went to a company called IBV Energy, who the city will now be working on for a contract for the lease of that land. Actually, it's for this property here. It's called Black Hills South area. It's about, I believe, 1,100 acres. They were the high bidder, and the Southern Nevada Water Authority was already engaged with them when they were bidding on that project. For them to be a partner to actually receive some of that power through a long-term power purchase agreement. So that's kind of a little bit of the background of why SNWA is even involved to begin with. As this has evolved, there have been requests from the City of Las Vegas, the City of North Las Vegas, and these are mostly from their utilities, Las Vegas Valley Water District, Clark County Water Reclamation District, because they're interested in purchasing renewables as well. What that does is it increases the amount that SNWA would be purchasing through a longer-term 25-year power purchase agreement so that they can negotiate a lower price, because I believe they were originally going to be purchasing about 77 megawatts, and then the additive, it's even more than that with the other agencies, including Boulder City, participating. So they've done some number crunching and have determined that we could purchase potentially, and I'm saying potentially, this letter of intent is non-binding. There's obviously would have to be more negotiations and contracts we would have to move into, and it'd have to go through city council approval and all those things. But what this does just gives IBV Energy and SNWA know that there's interest in potentially purchasing that power at, as you can see here, for $30.50 a megawatt hour. That's getting real close to our Hoover allocation power purchase price, and it's certainly cheaper than our market purchases that we are entering into now. So it looks like it's approximately about $150,000 in savings a year compared to the current market purchases. And so we just wanted to let you know that's going on. It's the energy market is certainly changing. To be able to purchase solar for this price is certainly not doable 5 years ago. So that's how quick the market is changing.
So just curious, great price, is it helping to meet peak as well, or is this a different product?
So this is where it
altogether?
gets a little different from for us as Boulder City, because we use the peak to offset peak power purchases with Hoover capacity, because that's the cheapest thing to do. And so they would have to use that model in conjunction with solar to do the same thing, to take advantage of when the sun's doing its thing. So it has a slight negative impact to the Hoover capacity purchases, but the savings offset it in the long term. And so we would end up eventually bringing SSEA back in, or SNWA back in, to help all of us understand what that load profile would look like and how they would manage the energy purchases on a daily basis. Just so I certainly want to understand it better.
So what they're trying to do is they're trying to lock in PPAs so they can go get their financing. And then where is this energy going to be dumped into the grid at?
So the concept right now, and I'll use the map, although you probably can't see it, is they would have their substation down here. And they would build SNWA would build a transmission line to tie up into their 230 circuit, the CRC circuit, and SNWA/CRC, because they can get it anywhere. They can get it to Meade from there. They can basically get it. They can, and those electrons they want would actually go directly to them, if you will.
So there shouldn't, well, it depends if there's a small amount of transmission or yeah.
It's called a wheeling charge.
Yeah, and so that's included in this 3 cents.
So,
really? Yeah.
So that corridor is going to be pretty congested up through there. And then from what I understand is the last solar contract we signed by the I-1195 interchange, they consumed the last breaker position at WAPA.
Yeah.
So the last 230 breaker position is gone. So that means they're going to have to tie in somewhere else. And last SNWA contract I know of is over on the Henderson side. So they'd have to go to the Henderson side of the hills through the Black Hills and then tie into the Henderson facility and then come back into the Western States Power Authority.
I believe that's correct. So there are, there's technical challenges with the alignment, but they're not insurmountable. So they are looking at some, because they could run, one of them is the town site project is well into design, and they're certainly not going to want to go in through the middle of it, and their poles shading their panels, so they're going to have to work through some of those issues or go around or whatever they need to do. But there's 3 or 4 options there, and I think that stuff can get worked out.
I personally think this is a very good idea. The price is great. I wish we could take more of it. I understand with the Hoover we've got and the CRSP that it's a little bit harder to deal with those kind of peak demand or peak resources. But that's the advantage of being tied in with SNWA, is that they can do that for us.
Yeah, I can pretty much guarantee you if we went out and tried to purchase just 8 megawatts for the city of Boulder City, we wouldn't get it for this price.
Will we get a chance to, at the early version of the draft contract of this?
Absolutely. And I think we'd have them come in and, give us provide the details of what the draft is in the draft and how it would work.
Because the amount of energy that they anticipate we'll get out of the 8 megawatts would be understandable. And then what type of daytime they're talking about? Are we talking 9 o'clock in the morning, or are we talking 6 or 8 in the morning till?
Right.
It all depends on the time of year, of course.
It does depend on the time of year, and I think we would take advantage of it more in the shoulder months maybe than we do with some of the Hoover, and so that's where they're going to have to.
But I would imagine the contract would probably state to cover their tails at what time frame and stuff. So it'd be interesting to make sure that.
See what that looks like.
Yeah,
I
see what that.
totally agree that we need to understand that. And so, and we've had that conversation with Scott, and they understand that as well. So, and they're going to have to do the same thing for their other member agencies.
Well, that's what they do. So, I mean, they'll figure it out. And at that kind of a price, that's a great price. It's just a little bit more than what we're paying for Hoover. And for was it all those years, that's a good deal, I think.
Yeah, just do anything again with the draft to see if they have an escalator in there or not. That would be the only thing. If it's every 5 years or something like that, make sure since it's a 25-year contract, I'd almost guarantee you they're not going to give it to us for 25 years for that price. But it'd be interesting how long they'd give it to us for that.
Right.
So there again, it's be the devil's going to be in the details.
Exactly, and so.
But I agree with everybody. Like, this is a great opportunity as long as we don't get any snags that's would be detrimental to how. But since SNWA is part of, and actually mostly Silver State, then that's the major advantage too. It shouldn't hurt ours because they're actually our Silver State. Right. If I'm trying to understand this properly, right? So.
Well, and it may actually hedge some of what we talked about earlier. If lake levels continue to drop, the chances are we may be paying a little higher rate on the Hoover side.
Yeah,
potentially,
yes,
right?
Yes, yeah, we would be.
Anyway, that's what's going on with that. No action necessary. Stay tuned. We'll certainly be back. I think it's probably a 6-month. I'd be surprised if we see anything in the near future, but certainly within the next 6 months, I believe we'll see something. There's a lot of work they have to do just with IBV, and then IBV is still working out the land lease deal with the city of Boulder City. So there's work on there, and they got to do before they'll be ready.
I had a question about the 8 megawatts. That's the maximum. In other words, how many kilowatt hours a year would we anticipate buying from these guys?
I don't have that answer with me, so.
Probably about a 20% resource, so it's
it is about 20
on average.
Not a lot
of kilowatt hours, but it's
certainly in the off peak. It's a bigger percentage, but we can get you those numbers.
So maybe 10% of our energy, 15% of the Boulder City, so 160 million kilowatt hours. So if it's 20, yeah. Anyway, okay, we'll figure it out later.
So I mean, during the peak period, it'd be about 20%, and in the off periods, it's probably closer to a little more than that, right? So if we take all 8 in the.
Well, it depends what you call an off peak, because this is just what
most
of our off peak is
I'm
when
just
the sun,
talking
when
kind
the
of
sun
seasonal,
isn't shining.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that again, that's the details.
Yeah, because I guess you would have to be careful if it's a must take, because we do have that March and April issue, which we almost
really
just use Hoover.
All Hoover.
We got SNWA to take that then. I mean, we can.
If they work, yeah. And
Right.
that's again, it's who we're working with.
It's a great mix with those guys, because with their water loads, they can shift a lot of that usage to off-peak hours. And so it works. I think there's a lot of advantages to being tied with SNWA on this deal.
Yeah.
How is the 30, how is the number determined for the, I mean, I realize it's less than other numbers, but those power purchase agreements are coming in at half of that, 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour a couple of years ago. So the price is dropping. So how was that determined?
I don't have that answer.
Did someone tell you? I mean, you wrote down the letter. You must have got.
No, they did their it's their calculation.
Oh, they offered to sell us.
That's their offer.
Okay.
Yeah. And it'd be the same for the other agencies, and that's the same that SNWA would be getting it from IBV. So yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't answer that question correct, but yeah, we didn't come up with that price.
They're proposing,
again,
what are they proposing for total size, 250 meg or 300? Because you said 1,200 acre, right?
Yeah, 1,100, I believe.
1,100?
I have that detail. but
Probably
I'd have to-
150 meg.
It's around there, and I'm trying to remember, I believe they might be looking at some energy storage as well, but I'm not
Yeah,
positive on
battery
that.
storage, yeah. Yeah, that's a big market mover right now.
Yep.
I'm just curious, are there other areas that are still available, could be leased for solar purposes down in the valley, or?
There's one more, which is actually right north here, which we're calling Black Hills North. I think it's around the same acreage.
Is that the Dutchman's Pass area they call?
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe so.
Okay. Has there ever been any thought about, we've got a lot of land here in the old existing 33 square mile city limits out east of what is now the I-11, between that and the Park Service area. Any thought about taking some of that land and putting it into solar?
This over here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that.
I've often wondered, just thinking that Boulder City's in a good position where we could work some kind of a land sale or lease arrangement with somebody and have our costs, basically the lease money that we would otherwise take could be paid in energy, to us. We got land out there that's just sitting there that's kind of cut off from the rest of the city now by that interstate. And there's a lot of land out there. There's a few sections out there. So something to think about.
We do benefit some from how that lease revenue is shared and how it goes to, capital projects. And so there's some benefit already.
Now, is that part of resource planning that we would be doing in the future? So would that...
If we were going to be determining how to dispose of additional land, that would probably have to go through the...
No, what I'm saying is part of our aspect for this committee is resource planning, so electrical resource planning, if I understand correctly. So if I understood Ned correctly, that this would be as much with electrical resource. Land is, you'd have to figure out how to do it first, but you would also be working with electrical resource as well as something else. So just something that we could talk about in the future is all that would
I think that would be something that this committee could weigh in on for sure.
So,
yeah.
And so maybe after we get the we'll get to the agenda and talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah. Any other questions on this item? All right. Thank you.
That leads us into item 5, which is the capital improvement projects, and I believe then does this sheet of paper then overwrite the spreadsheets that were in the package?
It does, so we can go through it, I think, relatively quickly, and if you have questions, it's just kind of a quick status on the ongoing utility projects. And feel free to ask questions. I may not have all the answers, but we can certainly get them to you. I'm going to use my scale here. And do you have a preference whether we run through each one or if you just want to take a look and ask questions? I know to make, in trying to answer some of the questions that have come up historically, some of these projects are budgeted in 1 year, but they don't necessarily get done in 1 year. Again, by the time we select a consultant to do a design and get a design done and go out for award with a construction package, what may have been budgeted in 1 year can extend well into 2 years. So,
Question I had on all these too is I assume you probably looked at them from a sense of urgency. Which ones are the most critical? Which ones need to be done now, and which ones can be delayed a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years?
yeah, and we're continuing to look at that.
Okay,
so
that's
I think
what,
we're going to have some recommendations for you probably at the March meeting, which will just based on our latest review of the CIP, where we can probably move some out and flatten out some of this peak a little bit. Again, the biggest projects are ongoing right now.
right. No, I think it's a way that we can maybe forestall or just forego any future rate increases, or maybe even look at some decreases over time as we move these projects out where there's not quite the push, and still get the work done, and look at, instead of, well, hopefully that's what we're looking at, is instead of rate increases, possibly some decreases into the future is what I'd like to see.
Well, I'm not going to say that, but it's possible.
It'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's for that's the balance of what we can do with the capital plan, and the work that the rate consultant's doing should be able to give us a good picture. And again, even if we don't do rate increases, we've all talked about some potential structural changes to the rate structures themselves. So even if a rate increase doesn't happen, if we change a rate structure, it could change it. It could create an increase in a tier, but not necessarily generate additional revenue. So I'll just go down this. I think we can get through this pretty quick. The equipment item, which is 3 lines down. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the smaller items, but that's essentially the vehicle purchases for this year. We've made one truck purchase. I believe that's what the $30,000 is. I should have got the list, but I don't have it with me. But there's a couple more on the way, and so we've expended or encumbered a small portion of that, about 27%, and then we have still available to get the remainder of those purchases. And if you guys want to get a list of what those vehicles are, we can get that to you. That was from FY20. The feeder 63 to substation 3 tie project, you'll see there's nothing been expended there because that's in design. The feeder 53 replacement project is in construction. It's about 40% complete. And these aren't huge projects, but they're all ongoing. The feeders on Avenue G in New Mexico are about 90% complete with construction. They will likely utilize that entire budget. Feeders on Avenue, Nevada to Utah, that's in design. Feeder 64 Temple Rock reroute is also in design. And I don't remember all of a sudden what this district improvement job is, but it's a small one.
That's the landfill.
Oh, at the landfill, that's done. That's actually complete. Yep, that is complete. So let me mark that as done because I know Marvis did that. Oops. The overhead 4K, well, there's small substation improvements project that's approximately, actually Marvis's guys have done some of that work, so we're going to have to figure out, that's one where we're going to figure out how to capitalize the work that they've done because they're doing that in-house. It's just a small project, and sometimes we do those in-house. The 4K overhead, again, that's basically the PAR contract. They pretty much completed the work for last year. We just negotiated the new budget, so we're saying that's basically about 10% complete with the work they're doing this fiscal year.
So if I can interrupt right quick, because there's 2 or 3 things that would be helpful as we go down. So first off, I guess if we're saying in design, there's probably a pretty good chance that it's not going to be completed until 2021 at least.
Probably not.
So we can assume that money will most likely
move forward.
Will move forward.
Yeah, because a number of these, the design's done in-house, and so, they're busy and, they get to them as fast as they can. But yeah, it's February, so yeah.
I understand, but I think, because I think if we can get the dates before the, or get some type of assumption before the, well, I guess it'd be the April meeting almost, trying to figure out what type of money we're assuming is going to roll forward because we know that the $12 million is not going to be complete for the 13 just out of electrical.
All right, so that's a good point. And so if we go to the very next project, and again, we're doing that distribution mapping. There's $200,000 sitting there, but Marvis's guys are basically working on that as they can. What we've learned through that process is it's a difficult thing to contract out. It's easier to have your own guys do it, and it's basically a training as well. It helps them understand the entire system. So,
but going back to the 4 kV, I had a question on that one, because basically, am I missing? I don't see it on the. It should be 2 of those. We have that's the one I'm a little confused on too. You've got, I think, was it fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 that was one basically $1.2 million twice?
Yes, and so I think this is the additive of the what was remaining plus the new contract.
Plus, well, you got, actually, that's the thing I'm a little confused on, because the 4K, the PAR contract was for the 49K and any other emergency purposes. So that you had a $900,000 contract that was taken from the 4K budget, but it was for other things, could be for other things.
It could be for other things, but the main focus and driver is for that conversion. The reason we put that language in there is there has been a couple of times where there's been a small emergency, similar to what I discussed earlier, and we've taken advantage of their fact that they're here and on site, and so that just provides us a way to pay for those. It's very minimal compared to.
But overall, though, isn't that a 2.4? Because you only spent $179. So
yeah, and I have that question for finance, because the contract should be encumbered, and it's not shown here for some reason. I don't know if that's just a timing issue from when this report was run.
It was actually, finance man was taking charge into the 69 kV loop, so that'll be fixed next week. So we have roughly 300,000 encumbered right now with material and invoices. That was a mistake on their part as far as where it got charged.
Okay. So also it looks like the budget though should still be increased, because the overall budget for that line item should be 2.4 for the 4K.
If you include next year, yes, but this budget is 1, and why it says 1.4, we had a little carryover from last year, because they said that we were out of money, that we had a little over $100,000 left from last year, so it just carried over.
All right, so I think we'll follow up with that and make sure this is accurate.
So then, so the next one we're looking at is the 69 kV. So the encumbrance is another one I want to try to make sure I understand. So is that money obligated, or, because it's really confusing when you go all the way across the.
If it's encumbered, it is obligated. It's been to city council and approved as a project. So that's typically what encumbered means.
Okay, but wouldn't we have available budget for that? I'm confused, because we have to be able to. We haven't paid for it yet. We just encumbered it.
Correct.
And so that was the one thing that. So when you go down to the very bottom, you got 13.9 million, and you say you only got 9.3 million that's available for that. So part of that is because a large amount of that is this 69 kV. Mm-hmm. They're saying so that's why I don't understand the encumbrance and the available budget. Those two are confusing me. Because it's good to say that you've held the money aside, because you've got that much to spend, because some of the other contracts you don't know exactly what you have to spend.
Right.
So the encumbrance tells me that, but we should also be able to say that we have money associated with that. Plus, that was budgeted for in 2000, all the way through 2019. It was in other years, and in 2019 we had the budget for that. So this is where it gets confusing, and trying to go forward to the 2021 is we want to be able to work with that, is to understand what are we carrying forward, and this is what has been carried forward.
Right, and in this case, for the 69 kV loop, this project will be completed before the end of the fiscal year.
Before 21.
Yeah, it'll be done. So right now, they're out drilling holes and poles are delivered, and, you know, the lead time issue, and there were two issues with this project. There was a neighborhood issue and the issue of undergrounding versus overhead. That took many months. Ned was aware of that. So that really slowed this project down from when it was originally budgeted, and even project was awarded. It was many months after that project started. And so, but now that are getting all the poles delivered and drilling the holes, the project goes relatively fast. It will be done probably by the end of April.
Okay, yeah, so I guess just, again, it'll be done for the budget. I guess we want to make sure then too that how the end of the year budget shows, I guess, would be the interesting aspect, how that shows that being funded. Because right now, it almost looks like you're saying you don't have funds for it. That's why I would look at the available budget, being what it says only $310,000 is available.
If I understood, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. That 300,000 was charged to the 69 kV loop. So is that saying that this 377,000 expended should only be 77,000 expended, with the other 300,000 going up to the?
There was 220-something thousand charged to the 69 kV loop budget, which should have been charged to the 4 kV to 12 conversion. That amendment will be made next week. So that 300 that we're saying that we have in the budget, that will go up to 500 because the encumbrance will come off of that.
Okay, so the year-to-date expended of 377,000 is actually,
It will come down.
yeah, down to, by 220. Okay.
Right.
But they didn't notice that? I mean, that's a pretty big difference.
It was just an accounting issue. They issued the wrong project number,
Okay,
and that's how that happened. So
okay.
we drew a PO off of the number they gave us, and we
Sure,
found
yeah.
that problem this week, and it'll be like that. It was already presented to finance. It'll be corrected next week.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess this is just still to understand this, all the columns before we try to help the council. I'm still thinking, because there's one way to look at it, and you can say if I'm understanding, you're saying you would add money back into the available budget, then that means it's available to use for other things. But right now, we're showing that, I thought we're trying to show that here's the available budget to show, and it shouldn't be budget, it should be available cash.
Available.
That's for the revised budget.
Well, it's available in the budget, right?
Right. Well, I got the lecture about cash and, sorry. So we won't go there.
Well, and so I think that's a good item of discussion when we have these kind of one-on-one meetings.
Okay, that'll be great, because like I said, we're short on time, so that's the reason I keep on harping on it.
Yep, no,
We've got basically next month, and that's it.
And so the next one, I think, is a great item of discussion, because here's one, again, that's over multiple years, and we're only showing a portion of the budget, because the project's bigger than what's currently budgeted, but because it's budgeted over 3 years. But the project itself is BC Tap to Buchanan overhead line, which is the project from the BC Tap all the way over to Buchanan to replace all that ancient poles that they're petrified, and they have more on them than when they were designed to put on them. So it's a high priority project. That project is, we're pursuing that as a design build project. So that takes time up front, but it expedites construction. But right now we're in that where we're just receiving the proposals, which you go through when you do a design build, you go through a couple of rounds, and they're on round 2 now. And this is a round where you actually eventually select the contractor. But I can tell you, it's already February, so if you assume you select and go to city council in the next 30 to 60 days, there you get a contract awarded. You got to negotiate the contract, then you got to get it awarded. Then, there won't be hardly anything expended in year one. That's just the way the larger projects go forward. Now, in a design build situation, you're able to start the design and start the construction almost simultaneously, depending on how much of the preliminary engineering work they can get done. They can start purchasing poles sooner, stuff like that. So it advances the project. The project as a whole is quicker. It's just a little slower up front. So,
Yeah, this is where, as I was stating earlier too, that so this could be the 3.8, could be 3.5, but most likely it's going to be 3.5 or more that would roll over into 21 and beyond.
right, and then it would be added to the budget.
So right now, you could just stay right now, you're asking, like I said, I think it's $7 million plus or stuff.
It's around 10, yeah, for the total project.
So yeah, you're looking at 10 a minimum right now, and as we go through some of these other projects. So this is what I think would be helpful to make sure the city council understands, and this could be part of our report, is to make sure that it's, if the 21 budget is saying one thing, we're going to need a certain amount of money for that year.
Right.
And that's what's confusing the last 2 years, is because, especially the capital has varied each quarter, month, or whatever.
Right.
So the more we can clarify that, the better off I think we'll be.
Yeah, and again, these are two of the biggest projects, and so they have a pretty significant impact.
I'm getting a bit confused here because you were saying this BC TAP is a $10 million project. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So it's over a number of years.
And this is roughly $4 million over 1 year, but we're not going to spend the $4 million this year. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay, so why budget $4 million for this year if we're not going to spend it?
Because the budgeting process is different from the cash flow. And so where we really, and that's not untypical. In some agencies, they would budget for the entire project in that one budget year, but their pro formas and their rate models are tied to cash flow, not to the budget and the anticipated cash flow. And that's what Raftalis will be. Those numbers will be spread over the years differently, potentially, acknowledging that you don't necessarily always spend all the money in the year that's budgeted.
And I think they're supposed to be bringing us some type of report or something on that in March. I was hoping, because they were going to explain why it was different and try to break it out to, I guess, to show the projects they believe will be done when.
Yeah, so you'll see what they will show in their model is that cash flow by year, it projected to the best that we can. So it won't match the budget, right? The budget's just the budget, but the cash flow is what's important for the revenue requirements and the rates.
But I think that's what Ned's been referring to in several different comments, is that for a good instance, I think it was $11 million that they're showing in 2022 or 23 in their report. Side note, we don't have it in front of us, but I believe it was one of the years it was a very high amount for capital projects. Yes. And so that would be one thing I guess we would want to look at. So we shouldn't have to be concerned this year, but we definitely need to look next year to see what the priority of the projects are, to see if we have to do that much in that year, or do we have the money to do it, and that's what it should be done. But
right, and so these priority projects would definitely take priority, and we can certainly look at moving some of the other ones out, and we'll be doing that internally as well.
Because this one is, as you said, this is the 69 kV and the Buchanan, both are very large contracts and are very important.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, let's see, do we even have, what's the, so I'm sorry to get off track a little bit, but what's one of the bigger ones? Do we have something this big coming up in the next 2-3 years?
No, I think it's just that there's a couple of the substation rebuilds or new substations. They're not this size, though. I think there was one year where there were multiple projects on top of each other, so they added up to that larger amount. And I don't have it in front of me either, but that's what we're currently taking a look at, because there is some ability to move some of those. Some of them have to be done in certain order, but the timing isn't as immediate.
And I think that's one thing to help.
Yeah.
What we need for April 1st, because like I said, I think we need to be voting on something on April 1st. So these items are probably more important for that, but I think we'll probably be looking at the next 5 years, and that's why it's important to understand what money, so that actually the way that the rate study's been looked at probably should be helpful.
Right.
Because then you're looking at how the money is, you're thinking you're going to need for each time, and that'd be very important for city council also.
Right, and frankly, based on what we saw, which was very conservative with that financial plan, because they didn't show increased revenues or anything. For the next couple of years, it's pretty good. I don't think we're going to be recommending. I hate to say this in public, but it doesn't appear right now there's going to be any recommended rate increases in the near future.
Yeah, I think the quick glance was that the electrical, I believe the water and wastewater was in great shape as far as money wise.
Right.
The electrical seemed to be pretty tight.
And what it showed
was
these projects getting done and that ending fund balance going down pretty rapidly.
Correct. So that's trying to understand, and that's the other thing too, trying to understand where the CIF, the Capital Improvement Fund, because if there was anything intended for some of these projects that had started before 2019, because all I can see is that we had something voted on 2019, but I thought there was other projects that were included in there before 2019. 2019 wasn't the first year that they established land money for the electrical, was it?
No, I'd have to get back to you on that.
Okay,
I'm not certain.
I don't think those monies were necessarily, prior to 2019, they weren't necessarily brought forward. And the Capital Improvement Fund does have a reasonable amount of money in it. If it is land that can be used for electrical, I just want to make sure that it is available going forward.
Okay.
I want to back up just a minute. BC Tap to Buchanan overhead line pole replacement. We're anticipating that to happen in 2021 to start?
To actually get started, yes.
Because that is imperative that first section gets done between the Boulder City Tap and Substation 3 before we can test the Boulder City Tap transformer.
Yep, and that would be the first phase because they can do that phase without having the design complete on the rest.
Right, and then that would allow us to also test the 69 kV loop.
Right.
So that all is imperative that gets started in 21.
Yeah, and frankly, that phase is easier than the rest.
I've driven it quite a bit, and you're talking a lot of rough rock.
It's a lot of rough rock, but it's not as complicated because you're not in the street. You're not, I agree with that part, but you're out of the way of the public. It's that part that makes it a little simpler.
And when we're doing this BC Tap to Buchanan overhead, we're also going to talk about OPEW fiber optic on the static wire.
We can
for our communications and our relay protection.
Yes.
Thank you.
Capital equipment purchase, that was a budget item to allow us to purchase some new equipment. We're working on the specs for that right now. And that was Marvis helped me out, a double bucket truck and a cable reel trailer. So I don't know. Ask Marvis.
For a million cable, backbone cable.
Claremont conversion. This is, I call it phase two. Some of this was work done in previous fiscal year. This will complete that project. It's in construction now, about 20% complete.
Now, I think this was asked before, because we have the Claremont conversion, and then is 2021 is the Claremont rebuild. Am I remembering that correct?
No, so in FY '20, we have the Claremont, that's what's happening right now. There was one that was completed previously. This basically finishes Claremont entirely.
The circuit was one of the other line items for this coming year.
I think so.
Some circuit type, okay. So this completes all that, okay.
Yeah. This 69 kV loop is a little anomaly. We're not exactly sure why it's in the munis like this, but it's a small number and that just needs to be corrected. BC Tap transformer breaker project is about, I'm calling it 90% complete. They're really at the point now where we're just working with WAPA on the controls. They got to do the testing on the generator. I would anticipate late spring it'll be done. Most of the site work is done. The old transformer's been taken away.
So we will be able to test it at the lower load, is that saying it correctly? So once before the poles get established, we'll be able to at least partially test the transformer before the end of this fiscal year? You can do testing on the generator. No, we wouldn't have the ability to do the full load test.
What he's asking is if you get your 69 kV loop in and completed, you could do a partial test on the bank.
Correct.
Because you could pick up feeder 3 and feeder 2, isolate it at Buchanan and Adams, and then carry the rest of the town on the new 69 kV loop section.
Right, but you couldn't do it right now without the first phase completed of the loop.
Well, you won't have any load until probably June anyway, so you could put about 40 megawatts on it at some point.
And the way the switching is done is it's a separate and then reconnect.
Yes. The transformer itself will be tested probably in the next 30 to 45 days.
You're going to bring a load bank in?
Yeah, they're going to do that. They did test it from the 230 side and just to heat the bank up.
Yeah, they're just going to soak it.
Exactly.
Right, but there's no load going to be put on it.
There'll be no load.
So you're just going to soak it at 230.
But as it is now, and we're contemplating this, I'm taking this around, and we're back to our original configuration with the new bank, obviously. So we can actually pick up load to sub 3 right now if we want to.
Yeah, you can pick up the whole town right now if you want to.
Well,
this time of year.
Not the line, but we can pick up.
Well, I'm just saying right now with the load you got this time of the year, you can do it. So, right.
Just stretch it a little tighter.
Yeah, we're in that process right now.
We could though, couldn't we pick up substation 3 off of that bank and just to put a little load on it?
3 and 2 and 1. I mean 3, 2 and
3 and 2 would be the load, but I'm just thinking out loud as an old guy who used to do switching and everything.
That's actually what we're going to do, is pick up 3 and see what, just
let it soak. Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you.
All right, so
I had one question. That one doesn't seem to be in the plan that was submitted, unless it was called something else in there, the one that was approved in April of 2019. If I'm looking at the Utilities Electric Division.
And I'm sorry, which one are you referring to?
The transformer breaker, I was trying to look it up in the capital plan that was approved in May 2019.
The transformer might have actually been back in 18.
Yeah, it actually goes all the way back to 15. You had 15,
I think
16,
15, there was some
17,
design
18,
work
so
done, and yeah, so it's been
that's been part of because actually, so most of these are probably 1920, but there are some that go back before 19 that you're not going to find there, and that's the very confusing issues.
So if they're ongoing, then they're not mentioned in the capital improvement plan for the next 5 years, if they're still ongoing? In other words, I don't understand why it wasn't in that plan.
Well, it wouldn't be, because all these are, like I said, these are from,
Right,
most
I
of these are
understand.
19 and 20, but some of them were beforehand. This BC TAP was before fiscal year 1920.
But you're talking about spending money in the
19,
future. If you're anticipating to spend money in the future, I would have thought that would be in the capital plan, even if you started it in 1820.
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, yes. I think that's what I want to get from this committee, and that's what I'm trying to get by April 1st, is a better understanding, so we can get better information to the council to understand that, yes, it's not just $7 million or $7.8 million that is
Right.
needed for 2021. We need more.
Right.
And so that is a key issue.
But what I'm asking, is that a policy then to not include ongoing projects when you ask for money in the capital improvement plan?
No,
Is that-
so in the summary, you will see ongoing projects in there.
Okay.
And so that's probably the simplest place to look, is the executive summary.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so I guess once we finish these line items on the electrical, sorry to keep things going longer, but if we can go to the page that shows the capital expenses in electrical, but I guess we'll finish it. It shows that there looks like they were actually spent on a lot of the feeders. So let's go ahead and finish it, but I'm really confused on what was shown as actuals, because then that's telling me that it's not necessarily what's shown in the expenditures compared to what's showing here are two separate issues. So let's finish the
Okay.
line item, then go. I want to go, if I can go
Yep.
back or look at that one sheet.
Okay, US 93 feeder replacement, there was a budgeted amount, and Marvis is here. I think what we ended up doing with this project, just from a timing perspective, is that was done by Marvis's folks. And so in this case, he had to take it out of his operating budget. So it's complete, but it's one of those ones we need to figure out how to capitalize moving forward. Feeder Arizona from Sub 1 to Nevada Way is in design. The meter replacement is complete, so I don't believe they'll be using any of that remaining $110,000 budget, so that would be something that would go back in the pot. And so that's it for electrical. If we're going to hop down real fast to water, there's $400,000 that was budgeted for BC Parkway. And that's the water, if you drive down there, you can see a big majority of that is complete with hydrants and service line replacements and valve replacements and a mishmash of different things that are involved with street projects. Water line to El Dorado Valley, they do show some available budget remaining, but for the most part, those projects are complete. There might be some consulting invoices that trickle in, but for the most, the project itself is 100% done.
Okay, yeah, because that was very confusing. You had two. Wasn't even sure there wasn't three in the spreadsheet, and
So
got quite a bit of budget, really left
there was two
500,000.
separate projects, one to bore underneath the freeway, and then the one to build the pipeline down to I-11. So that's why it's shown as two projects.
Okay. So that's really okay. So at the end of the year, hopefully that will fall off. But it shouldn't be as much as the 2.3, all because you shouldn't have a whole lot of invoice.
Yeah, no, I
Cost to it.
would expect that to be done, totally done
Okay.
on that project.
Again, that would be helpful to understand that to going forward with the water going forward for next year.
Yeah. AC pipe replacement, the way they had budgeted that was anticipation of things that they might need to replace. We got a consultant on board, so we just put a hold on those projects until they get done with their condition assessment. So there was some money that was spent on some surveying for a potential project, but that's it. It's just on hold. Same thing for the large meter vault backflow replacement. We're having them take a look at that program and make some recommendations on, based on the number and the needs, and give us some, better program for the those types of replacements. Copper service replacement. There's 2 projects currently under construction, or one under construction. They should be well along and finished by the end of the year. There's another one that's just starting. So this encumbrance should go up pretty rapidly because they just awarded those projects. But I would anticipate at least 3/4 of the $400,000 to probably be expended by the end of the year. And then the third phase or the third project we're working on is in design, and we'll go out to bid shortly, but it probably will go into next fiscal year a little bit. Improvements other than buildings, I honestly have to go back and look into that line item. I believe this is actually where they put where they're just showing. Actually, I'm going to have to get back on this one. It's not what I'm thinking it is, so I'll let you know. I can tell you one thing: we haven't spent anything on it. So, access and security improvements. We've somewhat waited on this one to start design until we got through NDEP's. They do what they call sanitary survey every year. They just completed that recently. There's just some small minor improvements. I'm not even sure they'll warrant the $50,000 total, but it's basically some security improvements around some of the reservoirs is all it is, so it's pretty minor. And that's it for water. Again, wastewater, there's some work included in the BC Parkway. In this case, it's around 50% complete. I do expect that to be mostly complete by the end of the fiscal year. Sanitary sewer rehab, this is again one.
Dennis, on that one there, we're showing 100% used. BC Parkway wastewater RTC, it's not 100%.
Right, as encumbered, but it's not, as far as the construction's not totally complete.
Yeah, but the encumbrances are only $204,000. You saw $300,000 is revised budget. So your encumbrances are only $204,000, not 100% used. Yeah, so you're saying that, okay.
Yeah, I'm saying, so, I'm anticipating it will all be spent by.
Right, but what's scaring me is on the progress update, it says 50% complete. So you're telling me that we're going to go to $600,000 on it?
No, I'm just telling no, I'm just telling you that. Yeah, but what I'm saying is and again, these are rough, very rough. On some of these are rough because I just got these from the RTC guys, so I can check that complete number. But do I anticipate it to exceed the $300,000? No. I think that's your real question. But I could see how you could do that math with the 50% complete. Sanitary sewer rehab, again, we put that one on hold for the condition assessment. The PLC upgrades, that is complete. Those were upgrades that were done on the wastewater side, the lift station of the treatment plant.
So now is the SCADA, is that on hold for the other? Because I was wondering if that was if that included any of the utilities, because you need something for water and power, right?
So we have SCADA right now for water. We have SCADA for all of them. What we are currently working on is a upgraded SCADA plan for the electric side, so we just don't have an estimate for what that's going to cost yet, but eventually it will feed into the capital plan as soon as we get that. So the folks that did, because it's all the same guys that do the work on the system, so we're having them come up with an estimate that we can build into the capital plan for the electric. And that, the hope is to make that more active versus a passive. Right now, it's just information. You would actually be able to switch things and turn things off. Landfill expansion.
Well, sorry, we missed one. You got the headworks, because I thought that
I'm sorry.
Howard had asked last time about the headworks, and I thought you said you didn't think you would need that $400,000.
No, and we have a consultant working on a plan right now. I don't anticipate it exceeding $100,000. The original plan was a complete replacement, which $400,000 probably wouldn't have been able to do, but there just needs to be a little bit of work done in a channel, and we need to do the replacement of a screen underneath a conveyor, because right now we take out grit, it gets into the conveyor, falls through the screen back into the channel, and goes into the treatment plant instead of being disposed of. So they just didn't design the screen right. So we're just anticipating having to put a new screen on the conveyor and some channel improvements, and that should be it.
So once the design's complete, then you have a better idea of probably the cost.
Yeah, again, I don't even know if it'll be 50,000.
Or at least hopefully, that would be one, again, to know that what would be going forward, because that looks like they'll probably go into next year also.
Yeah, it could, just a little bit, but.
Okay. It's not a big amount, but it's still enough.
Landfill expansion, we have some ongoing air quality permitting and permit revisions, and that's more of consulting work than anything else. That perimeter fencing and road design is something we're working with our consultant and the landfill operator to determine if that's necessary or not. So it may move into the next budget year, and it may still be necessary, but right now we're going through the steps of validation on the project itself. And that's pretty much it as far as where the projects sit.
Okay, so I don't know if you have it handy. So if you look at the electrical capital fund worksheet or spreadsheet for on the where we were talking about the budget. So electrical fund capital 61,900. It's a black and white page, at least in mine. Maybe it's not in the other years.
Electrical, yes, got it.
So you have 2018-19 actuals, 120 actuals budget, and then 2020 budget and 2021 budget. There's a couple things confusing. You've got improvements other than buildings, and you've got a negative 3 million and a negative 4 million, 3 million in 2018-19. It almost looks like you're accounting for what was theoretically spent. And I say theoretically because in 2019 you've got all these feeders that have large amounts of spent money, and I'm not, maybe I missed something here then. Let's see, 147. Okay, 53.
Yeah, I think we'll just need to take a look at that. I don't have a.
Yeah, I don't think we've got all the money that's being shown spent in the actuals in 2019 is not coming. Well, I guess maybe you're saying that was spent in 19 and it's not year to date, but it should still be part of the project, I would think. So year to date, it would be still overall part of the project.
Yeah, well, I think we just need to circle back on that one because I don't have an answer.
Okay. Because so I guess the two questions I would have is why do we have negative numbers in improved other than buildings, And then why are the actuals for 2019 and possibly 18 don't seem to match the latest capital improvement
Right.
aspect. But overall, though, I greatly appreciate I think we're starting to get a better handle on it, and it's making more sense now. So the other thing we came out with from the other meeting was that, if I understand correctly, if it's not on this sheet, then the project is not, the project's
It's
done.
dead.
Or, dead.
Dead or done.
It's dead or done.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so you wouldn't, and I think there wouldn't be a surprise where, it was planned for and it should have been done, and all of a sudden we bring it back. That's not what's going to happen. And any of the projects you see in the capital plan are new projects or ongoing projects.
so just to clarify, so since we originally started with the 2015 through 2019, I think is what we started
We
with.
started with,
And then 15 got dropped off, 16 got dropped off, I think, and then 17 eventually. I think we were just looking at 17 on the very last sheet that you had given us. And so now, all that, this is the latest and greatest, those are no longer valid.
right,
And so if some reason that there was still an ongoing one of those in that aspect, but it's not in here, then we don't have,
we don't have to, it's like dead or done.
okay, sorry to repeat, but I'm just trying to
Yeah.
make sure I understand.
Yeah.
So what question is it could be that the next 10, 20 year thing, something might come up and say, well, we didn't get it done, but we need to get it done. But as the next 5 years, we probably won't worry about it.
No, I think, and especially for the electrical fund, because that's where most of the money is, those projects that are planned are pretty solid. And then there may be some added with what we learned from the work that, from the pole integrity testing and the drone work. But I see that more as a longer term, just pole replacement program. I don't see any new significant projects. And then after that, I think we're typically going to be looking at just ongoing maintenance.
Okay. But again, thank you very much. This is helpful. And the next thing, just make sure I understand the encumbrance and the available budget aspect. I sort of understand it, but I'm not completely sure.
Yep, and then just a little bit of good news, we finally have a CIP coordinator hired, which going forward will certainly help. It doesn't help us much with the past history issues we have, but certainly going forward for tracking projects and giving us progress updates and on a regular basis will help us all out a lot. They'll be able to get reports to you eventually and to us and to me as the guy who's responsible for the money, but not driving the projects. They're done through Public Works, and so those reports, that person will be really handy to have on board. So we'll have to bring them up to speed and get them going. It'll take some time, but at least we finally got that position filled. So.
I had one comment. It'd be useful to have these numbers in this spreadsheet that we have here to match maybe the numbers in the capital improvement plan, because they're different numbers for the project, and sometimes it's hard to see which is which.
Was there any other comments on this capital improvement? Okay. So now then comes a little bit harder issue, not as hard as these, but trying to figure out the where we need to discuss going forward in the timescales and the future agenda. We have, as I've said it several times tonight, but I believe we need to vote on a report, which I'm not positive that we don't have to have a report done by April 1st, but we have to have something ready for the council. What we were saying, I guess by the last meeting in April, the first meeting in May.
I would think the last meeting in April would be the safest.
Well, I had one thought, which would be to buy ourselves some time, would be to move the first meeting of our committee in May to the last week of April, which would give us a bit more time to to discuss things, and then we can, the mayor wanted the info by the end of April, is what he said at the previous council meeting where I presented our report. So I thought, well, if we vote on it the last week of April, then we can just email them and say, here's our stuff, and they got it by the end of April. But it's just a thought.
Well, I think is what I heard in some things too, is that we want to try to keep consistent if we can with the meetings, try to keep, if we can on our general meeting, keep that on the first Wednesday. But we could also have another meeting. We could have a special meeting just to vote on it. So I think that would be my suggestion. If we can't meet it by April 1st, then maybe we have a meeting as soon as possible after that. I guess the question is, though, what do we have to have? So what do we need to do next month to have something that we can make some intelligent report or be helpful to the council? That's what I'm trying to figure out. What do we need on the agenda? That's one of the big things. We have to make sure, so we do know one thing, so we'll get to the agenda. We do know we have to get a voting aspect on the agenda for April 1st, so we'll get to that at the next one. So right now, tasks, what do we need task-wise? We have 2 meetings in March. We're going to do a regular meeting and the workshop. So the workshop, do we want to do the working capital in the workshop? Again, so we do the workshop and then the working capital?
Was a date ever decided for the workshop?
I believe it was the 9th.
We landed on the 9th, so we wanted to verify that tonight to make sure. I know we had, might have been you that couldn't make it.
So
I can't either.
you can't make it?
March 9th,
Okay, so Greg, were you able to make it on the 9th?
6.
Monday the 9th?
Well, we need to confirm it because,
I'm available on the 9th.
and Keith?
Yeah.
Okay, so if the people are here tonight, we have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
That's good.
So
yeah,
we'd
I
have
would
to check with
suggest
Howard to make sure if he can, but we have a quorum
Yeah,
at
and
least.
we can send it out
Yep.
to verify that and make sure Howard gets that as well.
Right, so we have the 9th, we have a quorum. So,
It's gonna be the regular meeting?
no, the regular meeting will be March 4th.
4th.
So we have
So
that. So it'll just be it'll be the next Monday, right after the meeting. But I'm afraid that we still need, and we could possibly, hopefully, then maybe we could make the regular meeting, because that's what I'm trying to figure out. What do we need in March? What do we have to get done? We need to understand the working capital.
So we're working backwards as far as what I think a recommendation from at some point, the committee needs to recommend they're comfortable with the FY '21 capital plan, because that has to be approved by the council and it has to go to the state, which also means you need to be comfortable at a minimum with 22, right? Because they're kind of tied together with a couple of the larger projects. Doesn't mean you have to approve FY '22, but I think you need to be comfortable with FY '22. There's clearly flexibility in the out years of how we manage the projects out beyond that. But the main thing City Council needs is an FY '21 recommendation for capital and for the operating.
So that means that we need to know which of these projects need to get done, and in what order, I guess, or at least, and how they fit money-wise into what we have available.
Right.
And then just move forward. So it shouldn't be that difficult, but we just need to make the decisions and do that.
You're gonna say exactly what I'm gonna say. We have to have good numbers to work with. And everything that's gonna be carried forward, we gotta have it listed. Because right now, we got stuff from last year that's still floating around, and the money has not been carried forward on this spreadsheet. In other words, we can talk about it, and George hit upon it, that we've got multi-year projects that we have to show that this is how we're gonna even the pain, because that's what it's gonna be, is the pain. And some of the things we have to do, like Ned's saying, is we have to figure out what is a priority. because we can't look into it. The drone report has not been issued yet. We don't know the
Right.
condition of existing poles and a lot of other questions. There might be some stuff that comes up that's a higher priority than what we're looking at right now.
Yeah. I think,
Well, how do we do that though? Because we have 1 month to do that. So can I ask in the back, is that something that's feasible to get a listing? Marvin, I'm sorry, I'm horrible. So is that something that could have by the 9th, that sort of?
are you talking about the priority of the projects? Oh, yeah, we can have that discussion. They, essentially, the way they're shown by year is the priority, but there is some, and I'm talking about electric, is the priority because there's certain things that have to happen before others can happen, sequencing-wise. That doesn't mean that you can't extend it out a few years, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess so that's that's a task.
Yeah.
And so,
I think we can summarize in a couple of paragraphs or in the priority. It's shown, at least the level of importance of the priority is already shown in the draft if you get into the booklet details, but we can probably provide something a little simpler than that.
now Ned, are you available on the 4th?
4th, I am 4th, yeah.
So is that feasible by the 4th then? So maybe we
For
do
the
need to do
priorities?
that on the 4th.
Yeah.
So that way, because Ned will be here and Eileen will be here, so we'll have more.
Right.
We'll possibly have everybody here.
Yep.
So maybe that's what we need to do then, is it can do that. So that's one aspect. So we're doing the operating budget. So you have the capital and the operating budget. So what we just discussed this time around.
And that makes it a little more complicated with, the white paper and the option of moving forward with the budget. Thinking through that a little bit, you can always amend the budget. And if we know it's not going to go up with bringing folks in-house, I guess that wouldn't have to stick with the budget process, but it's easier if it does. It just becomes a timing issue and the difficulty of being comfortable with the information we provide tied to the timing of completing the white paper and getting a recommendation out there on hiring versus outsourcing.
So we're going to.
So basically what I'm saying is we added a level of complexity by bringing this issue up. But
Right, but I guess that isn't, if that happens, great. If it doesn't, then that's something we can't control.
Right.
The white paper and on that aspect. But the rest of the budget, we would want to feel comfortable to say, yes, we agree with what we've seen or something on that line, I guess. Because I'm still trying to figure out what we would be, maybe that's what we need to do is sort of a draft. So that's another task, is we would be voting on a report, is that correct, on April 1st? So the report would have to be completed for that meeting,
By that meeting.
by that meeting.
Are we talking about our report now?
Yes.
or-
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The report, now there's several, report on what specific issue?
What we recommend, our next report to City Council, to what we recommend for the budget going to the state.
Because
The
this,
approved budget. Is
yeah,
that-
so really it's two issues. It's the FY21 CIP and the operating budget.
Okay.
Those are the two higher priority.
And they're both at the same time though, aren't
I
they?
believe so.
Okay, that's what I thought.
but that's like May 26th when they decide, right?
No, but like you
Yeah,
said,
but
that they want it by the.
They want it by the end of April, right?
Right.
So
and
we can make
because
it work.
it needs to get to councils.
Yeah,
for
yeah,
their
no, I
approval.
understand. The mayor was adamant there,
Yeah.
yeah. It's-
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we need on the agenda for starting on the 4th to
Right.
start a report, to even write it?
Well, there's a couple of things. Of course, we're talking about agenda now, but
Okay, well, let's go.
versus the timeline.
Let's put that off then. So the task, but sometimes it was leading, do we have a task associated with that?
Clearly, the priority would be a task, understanding that priority. And I think if I can be so bold as to say, focus on electrical, because we can manage the water and wastewater, and we'll at least maybe have some idea of what the consultant has seen at the April 4th meeting. We can talk about that on the agenda, so at least if they're finding anything significant.
You were going to do did I understand correctly that on the March 4th agenda, sorry, talking about agenda, but the
I know,
task,
it's important to the task. And
is that you're looking at updating the assessments for
Yep.
all, I guess,
water,
the two
sewer, and power.
Right. And so that would give us a little bit of a priority issue also, because if something new comes up, then we need to
Yeah.
figure out what's going on. So that's going to be on the 4th. That could be a little time consuming. It might not be.
Yeah.
So we have the priority. So we'll get to the agenda, but is there another task we need for the 4th that everybody's going to be here?
Associated with the priority, we need to know the real numbers that are available for those priorities so that everything fits.
Yep.
So we need the most accurate capital spreadsheet that we can get.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we could, and the actuals help, because I think that's probably, we'll get a little pushback saying what's the thing, but the actuals, the worksheets or the spreadsheets associated with the operating budget looks like they need to be looked at.
A little bit, yes.
And so we'd want to be able to have that. So I'm sorry, what'd you say again?
Accurate numbers
So
associated with each priority
accurate
item.
CAP, accurate, yeah.
Yep.
At some point, we have to freeze it and say, okay, these are the numbers, so we can write, we'll say whatever happens at this date, we're done, and we're going to start writing a report based on
Because
that.
the actuals are changing every month. So,
It won't be hard. Well, at that point, it'll be an easy thing to do. You know, we can just move forward with it.
right. And
Okay, and so the task is you would have a task of writing the report on the 4th. Probably, you would have to discuss it. So I guess we're back to the agenda.
yeah.
I'm sorry, so then what else do we? I'm not trying to delay the meeting here, I'm just trying to, since we really have one meeting that we'll all be here before we vote.
Right. Well, I don't see it being all that difficult. I don't see it being all that difficult if we know what the priority projects are and we know what the dollars are, just lay them out and we can come up with what the actual budget needs to be to establish that. And
Right.
if we have money to do it, then we move forward with that, I think.
I think, we just need to discuss these things, get a sense of where we're going, and then the report can be written by one of us, as we discussed, and then it goes to Joshua, and then we provide feedback, and then finally, end of April, we have our meeting and final discussion and vote, and we're done. That should work.
It doesn't sound that complicated, really, so.
If it doesn't work, we'll learn something, and we have to do it another way.
Okay, so I think the last thing under task then is that you and I talked quickly about how to try to track the tasks that are being done and some of these things. So I think some of the stuff that we've said we need to keep moving forward have sort of fallen through after some of the minutes.
Right, and in specific items that the committee may want a recommendation, may eventually want to make a recommendation, especially, and I'm kind of referring more to what's going on the rate side. Or, I can think of, we know, right, we've talked about the basic water service charge, and, the recommendation doesn't have to be 100% detailed, but it says, we want to modify the water. You guys would have to decide exactly how you want to put it, but I'm just giving an example. We want to modify the basic water service charge to include a certain amount of usage in the basic water service charge, which again will impact the tiers somewhat, but that's for the consultant to figure out what that is. But I think I've heard from everybody and the community and mayor and council that that's something they want us to do. And so I think that's a, one for the committee to put in writing and make a recommendation on. And we're pretty much kind of sort of telling the rate consultant as we've been going along to do that anyway. So, but I think it's just good to have that.
You said
some more, and we talked about the water resource plan and water conservation. I don't think the committee has to develop a conservation plan for the city, but I think the committee can make kind of a broad statement about the city, and that would be staff and working with the committee and city council, developing a plan to do some more plan-driven conservation projects, because we already know we're going to do that with the golf course. I think Colby mentioned they already have that technology where they go out and they know where people don't hit the balls and there's no reason for grass to be there, and so they can help with what that plan looks like. And so we could be broad as, let's consider doing some park turf replacement programs, but something to start that moving, because we do get feedback from the community about exactly what our resident here, Mr. Volt, said about water waste. And so just, I don't know what those words exactly look like, but something that says the city needs to start working on those more than we are now. It's very passive. That's another thing that I think will help, because right now staff, if we get a water waste complaint, we go out and look at it, but we're not actively sending out letters. We're not actively working with our irrigation group on their irrigation scheduling. We're just, those are things that can be done. We're just not doing them. So.
Well, the one thing you talked about was possibly somehow making sure that we get things written down from each meeting and move forward. So because it's I think even the months we're forgetting certain things.
I think we can develop a list. It may not be exactly what you want to say, but it's things we've talked about that you can put into a recommendation. We can do that.
So I think this time we're just looking at the recommendation just for the two things that we stated, right? Yeah. So right now we don't have to worry about as much.
Yeah, some of those other ones are just out there, but we can
start in April or May. We might start looking harder at that.
Some of these other things.
So I think we just wanted to get it established that we are trying to figure out a better way to keep bringing things forward.
Right.
And so that was part of the tasks.
Right. So I think you're exactly right. The priority is the initial CIP, the operating budget, getting through the rate study, and then all these other things we can follow up with afterwards. But let's get them written down so we know they're there.
The one in April is those three things that you mentioned. That's the stuff we want to get into the report for April, or just the rate study and the CIP at least. The CIP is the number one priority.
The CIP is the number one, the operating is the number two, and the rate.
The rate
we probably won't be there in April, but we'll get the cost of service results in March. I think they can talk about the financial plan model as well. They'll be refining stuff. And frankly, there's probably going to be some, what I think, and I am guessing, when they do cost of service, they look at the equity between the commercial rate and the residential rates. And they're going to look at the city, the city has their rate, and what does that look like based on, what they're using and the equity across all of those. And so there may be some difficult conversations or potential policy recommendations that the committee would need to make if they wanted to change something. Now, it would be very difficult, I think, to go say, because I haven't seen the results, so I don't even know. So I'm just trying to think ahead if there's this significant equity on either water or power or whatever between the commercial rate and the resident rate, do we want to mess with that? Do you want to try to make that more equitable? Well, that's sometimes easier said than done, just because of the, you know.
So when are the results due? When's the study due?
I have to go back and grab the actual study completion date, but we won't even see the cost of service until March. So.
Well, I think, if I remember correctly, one or the other, and I believe it's the rate study, did not have a due date. That was one of the problems with the contract. It didn't have a termination date.
I think we came up with a due date. I think the challenge with the rate itself, if there's a rate well,
I'm saying the contract itself did not have a due date, so we can't necessarily push. I think they agreed to do it at 66, I think it was like 6 months. So I think June was sort of the time frame they were shooting for, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, it is.
Which is not in the contract. I'm pretty positive, because it's either the water assessment doesn't have a contract date or that one doesn't. One of the two does not.
Yeah, I'll go back and look to verify that. But we've been working with them to expedite everything to the extent that they can do that. I mean, Brown and Caldwell has brought in additional staff, and they're trying to get that. We worked with the electrical condition assessment folks to get their stuff done, hopefully by the end of this month. So where I think it's going to be a challenge with I think it's just going to be a challenge on the rate portion itself, meeting that up with our budget date. Doesn't really impact budget. It's oftentimes they like to do it with the budget, because then you don't have to go through the business impact statement process. But you know, if we miss budget and we have to go through the business impact statement, okay, you know, so be it. I mean, it's just a little bit of work, and public hearings, public notification. If there is and that's if there even is a business impact. But other than that, a rate implementation just doesn't have to happen with the budget.
All I was going to say is, did you give this PPA possibility into the rate study people for solar?
Not until after I get some feedback tonight. But yeah.
Okay, so I don't think there's the task. Then we'll push harder on possibly again. We'll bring it up again next meeting, because again we've talked about having that on the agenda all the time. So I think we're good for that right now. Is there anything I'm missing for the tasks? I know I've beat a dead horse, but I'm trying to.
Good plate full of stuff.
Yep.
Okay.
I was just wondering, we could have discussion of report to council on CIP and operating budget as an agenda item for next March. Just a discussion of that report.
Okay, good, because that's the thing next then. So if nobody has any, Keith, did you have any? Okay, so if we don't have any more, then let's go to the agenda item, and we can just start getting that down, and hopefully we can do that pretty quick. So of course we got number one. We just got minutes. And then 2, just for ease of use, we have the assessments, right?
Yes, so we'll probably have 2 different presentations / updates. One for the water and sewer condition assessment, and one for the aerial integrity testing on the pole assessment.
Okay.
And that one, we can probably show some kind of cool video and stuff. And it's kind of fun stuff to look at. Well, actually, we can actually have like 5 minutes of fun.
It's fun?
Yeah.
Okay. Then you have the updated CIP summary.
Yep.
And then is that going to be with priorities, or is that a separate agenda item? How do we want to do that?
I think we can do that. I think we do it with priorities.
Yeah, I think so.
And then, so with a priority, do we need to vote on that? So I think, do we want to say at least possible action? So we need to say at least possible action.
Okay.
So that way, if we decide that we do need a vote of some type, we would be able to do it. So possible action. Okay, and then CIP priorities. Okay, and then, so then if we got what George is saying, we I guess we want as an agenda item to discuss a report for the city council with the CIP and the O&M budget. And assign somebody to write it? Do we need to go in that big a detail, or is it that big a deal?
Yeah,
We say
to go in
discuss
that
it.
big a deal. Yeah, just discuss
To
it.
discuss report. Okay. And now then, so do we need anything else? So if we keep these standing, the tasks and the agenda, do we need anything else before we put those into play? So is that going to cover us
I think that covers you for the March meeting.
for the March 4th?
Yep.
Okay.
And then if you want to, right now, what we had, only thing we had anticipated for the March 9th meeting was the rate consultant, but if we, you can add, if you want to add, you can certainly do that.
Yeah, because if we start writing, have somebody start writing a report. Okay, we'll just have to we'll discuss that on the 4th, and just not sure how easy it's going to be.
Yeah, and if staff thinks of something that we will send it out, and we can
Okay, so
talk about it before then.
are we good on the agenda? Is there anybody else think of anything else that because I just want to make sure that we're covered on the agenda so we can discuss it, so we're ready to vote on the 1st, because that's the thing we're definitely going to have on the 1st, is that we're going to have vote on the report.
Yep.
I guess. April 1st, so that'll be in March 4th. We got to make sure that we have that going forward.
Yep.
I just feel like we're missing something, but as long as, public, yeah, comment on that, of course. So, and I guess maybe if you and I at least meet to discuss things, maybe see if we miss anything.
Yep, we can certainly do that.
So, okay. Okay, so I know this is another long meeting. Apologize for all that. So I guess we'll just adjourn. Well, nope, we got public comment. So public comment.
Two brief comments, please. Okay.
Yeah, you have to be done before 10.
Fred Volz for the record. Two brief comments on the CIP spreadsheet. I think for further clarity, you need to add another column that says the totality of all expenses across multi-years, however you want to head it, for a project. That would be very helpful to put the current fiscal year's numbers into context. And secondly, I would encourage that there be a much more realistic budget for the year of what can actually be spent. Because as you were describing tonight from the utilities department, there's a long lead time on these projects. And so you're saying you're going to spend a couple $1 million, but in reality, by the time you go through the design and the bidding and everything else, you're really not going to spend it in the fiscal year. So I think that would add a lot of clarity to the numbers. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, was there anything else before? Okay, I make a motion to adjourn. Can you get it?
I second.
Aye.
Okay, we're done.
Aye. Oh, I don't get a vote, do I?
Recorded now, you do. You got to go home and lay down.
You might just come